Chapter 767. Yu said, "There is nothing in this world that is incurable. Even the vicious poison in Prince's body was cured." "You know quite a bit." Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows. If this woman had not violated his taboo, he would not have minded giving her some praise. Yu ignored him and continued, "The reason why there is no antidote is because the poison and antidote come from the same herb and cannot be replaced. In other words, even if the same herb is found, the antidote can only cure the poison from the same herb. Therefore, every poison and antidote is unique. The antidote for Emo Jingli's poison is in my hands. If that is the case, it is no wonder that Emo Jingli dares to cause trouble under I's nose." Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and said with a smile. To Emo Jingli, even if Yu had no other use, just this point was enough for Emo Jingli to do his best to take her away. After all, not having a son was Emo Jingli's greatest pain and weakness other than the throne. "Where is the antidote?" Emo Shuyao asked. Yu gritted her teeth. Emo Shuyao said calmly, "I do not need that antidote. I only need Emo Jingli not to get it. Tell me, if I killed you now, would I be able to do it?" When faced with such an opponent, there was no other way but to retreat without limit. In the end, Yu could only reluctantly take out an eye-catching hairpin from her hair and throw it into Emo Shuyao's hand. Emo Shuyao threw it to Qin Feng at the door and said, "Let Xinyang take a look." After losing almost all of her bargaining chips, Yu seemed to be much more relaxed. She fell into the chair and looked at Emo Shuyao saying, "I have nothing to say. What else do you want?" Emo Shuyao still wanted to say something, but the guard outside the door reported, "Prince Wangfei, Prince Li is here." Emo Shuyao leaned on Yi Li's shoulder and laughed softly. "Sure enough, you found Emo Jingli's Achilles heel. You came at the right time." Yi Li looked at him helplessly. Was it really good to gloat over this kind of thing? When Emo Shuyao was done laughing, he held Yi Li's hand and turned to Yi Wenhua. "Father-in-law." Yi Wenhua had never heard Emo Shuyao call him father-in-law before, but at this moment he felt that it would be better if he never heard it. Emo Shuyao stepped forward with trepidation and said, "I'll leave Yu to you for now. If anything were to happen, your entire family would be dead." "Yes, I understand. I won't let them do anything rash." Yi Wenhua replied in surprise. He almost didn't expect that today's matter would end well. He thought that Yi was going to die. He didn't expect that Emo Shuyao would unexpectedly relent, so he quickly agreed. After all, Yi was his daughter. Emo Shuyao nodded with satisfaction and left with Yi Li. In the study, old Madame Yi and others didn't catch their breath until all the guards outside the study left. Wang Shi pulled Yi Wenhua's sleeve and cried, "Old master, what should we do now?" Yi Wenhua's face was as calm as water. He stared at Wang Shi, who was crying for a long time. Just when Wang Shi thought that he was going to say something, he slapped her hard on the face. This slap was even harder than the previous one. Wang Shi's head hit the edge of the table and blood immediately flowed out. "Old master! Father! What are you doing?" The three of them screamed in fear. Yi Wenhua stared at Mrs. Wang and said, "Stay in your own room obediently. If you dare to step out of the room, you can get the divorce papers and get out." "Old master!" Wang Shi was so scared that she even forgot to cry. Yi Wenhua stopped talking to her after he finished talking. He looked at Yi Yu and said, "And you don't be so smart if you don't want to die. Don't drag the Yi family down with you." Yi Yu lowered her eyes and clenched her hands that were hidden in her sleeves. "Father, I know. It's good that you know," Yi Wenhua said in a low voice. "Whore." Old Madame Yi frowned. She was very unhappy with her son's tough behavior. Yi Wenhua didn't wait for her to finish and said sternly, "Mother, do you really want to see the Yi family die without any descendants?" Old Madame Yi was shocked and said, "How can it be? You are Yi Li's biological father, how dare she?" Yi Wenhua smiled bitterly and said, "Li may not, but when did Prince Ding really treat me as his father-in-law? Mother, do you know how many people Prince Ding has killed these years? Or do you think that he can't do it?" Old Madame Yi was silent. These years, Emo Shuyao had killed many people on the battlefield. Just for Yi Li alone, how many people had he killed? Thinking of this, old Madame Yi couldn't help but shiver. Yi Wenhua snorted and ignored old Madame Yi, who wanted to say something. He turned around and left. Yi Li and Emo Shuyao walked out of the study and went to the front hall side by side. Yi Li asked curiously, "What are you going to do with Yi Yu?" It wasn't that she didn't trust Emo Shuyao, but it wasn't like Emo Shuyao to let her go so easily. Emo Shuyao lowered his head and looked at Yi Li with a gentle smile. Since she entertained I will let her be happy for 2 days. Yi doesn't look like someone who will leave her fate to fate. She was able to escape from death in the palace, let alone now. And Yi was a smart person. She must have guessed that Emo Shuyao wouldn't really let her go. She was afraid that something would happen if she was left alone. Emo Shuyao smiled faintly and said, I am afraid that she will leave her fate to fate. Fear. Didn't she want to burn Li to death? It's too easy for her to die like this. Li, don't worry about her. Come with I to play with Emo Jingli. He didn't give Yi Li time to think and pulled Yi Li to the front yard. Zhuo Jing and Wei Lin, who were following behind them, couldn't help but shiver. They both looked at each other. Was Prince planning to burn Yi Yu alive? So they had to sympathize with her. She might as well have been killed by Prince just now. Also, what do you mean by teasing Prince Li? Your Highness, are you sure you're talking about Prince Li and not the little white dog that young Madame Su raised? Chapter 768. In the main hall of the Yi Manor, Emo Jingli sat and drank tea with a gloomy expression. Only his tightly clenched hands showed the anxiety and anger in his heart. After thinking about it all night, he still couldn't relax. He originally wanted to come to the Yi Manor to see if he could get the most important thing from Yi Yu and then find a way to send her out of the city. But he didn't think that he would still be one step too late and let Emo Shuyao and Yi Li beat him to it. No matter how powerful Emo Jingli was in Jiangnan in Li City, he could only tolerate Emo Shuyao's family. It was just like the saying, a strong dragon can't beat a local snake. In the land of the Northwest, no matter how powerful one was, even a tiger had to lie down and a dragon had to coil up. Glancing at the black-clothed guards standing respectfully at the door, Emo Jingli's expression darkened. He finally suppressed the anxiety in his heart. Why has Prince Li come to the Yi Manor so early in the morning? Emo Shuyao's voice carried a lazy smile from the door. The corners of Emo Jingli's eyes twitched. He raised his head and saw a pair of shadows walk in hand. His gaze fell on the two holding hands. Emo Jingli's expression became even uglier. He looked at Emo Shuyao with a fake smile and said, Didn't Prince Ding and Princess Ding arrive earlier than I? Emo Shuyao pulled Yi Li to the main seat and sat down. He smiled and said, Yesterday, someone came to report that the Yi Manor found a fugitive that the Prince Ding mansion has been chasing for many years. I and Princess Li were worried about the safety of the Yi family, so we came early in the morning to take a look. Could it be that Prince Li also received the news? Emo Jingli said indifferently, Prince Ding is joking. I haven't heard of it. Emo Jingli laughed coldly in his heart. How could he not understand Emo Shuyao? Even if the Yi family died in front of him, he might not even bat an eyelid. Coming up with such a lie was clearly just to brush him off. King Li hasn't told I yet. Why is King Li here so early? Emo Shuyao asked in a good mood. Emo Jingli said coldly, Can't I come to the Yi residence? Emo Shuyao shrugged. Prince Li is also the son-in-law of the Yi family, so of course he can come. Whatever, Prince Li is a guest. I don't want others to think that my Prince Ding mansion does not treat guests well. Then Prince Li, please take a seat. I just obtained something interesting in the residence and was planning to go back and study it. A strange light flashed across Emo Jingli's eyes. He didn't expect Yi Yu to be able to withstand Emo Shuyao's attacks. But when he heard Emo Shuyao say this, he couldn't help but feel resentful. If he had known this would happen, he would have taken Yi Yu back to the post house even if Emo Shuyao found out. The women of the Yi family, other than Yi Li, were all incompetent. After saying this, Emo Shuyao was no longer in a hurry. He leaned against the chair and played with Yi Li's hair while waiting for Emo Jingli's reaction. In any case, the bargaining chip was in his hands, so he had the final say in the price. From the looks of it, Yi Yu had really given him a big gift. After a long time, Emo Jingli stared at Emo Shuyao and said in a low voice, What do you want? Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows in confusion, as if he didn't understand Emo Jingli's meaning. What does Prince Li mean? I don't understand. Emo Jingli's eyes were filled with anger. He stared fiercely at Emo Shuyao and said, What will it take for you to give me the thing you took from Yi Yu? Yesterday he had only taken a small portion of it from Yi Yu. After a doctor's examination, it was confirmed that it was the only true antidote that Emo Jingchi had given him. But the amount was so small that it could be ignored. This. Emo Shuyao looked at Emo Jingli with interest. He was like a cat that had been set on fire, so he was in a good mood. He happily rubbed Yi Li's hair and asked softly, Li, if there's anything you want, quickly ask Prince Li. Prince Li occupies Jiangnan and is not as barren as the northwest. It's rare that Prince Li is so generous. Yi Li looked at Emo Jingli's angry expression with amusement. She couldn't blame Emo Jingli for being so angry. Any man would be furious if they were caught in such a situation. Of course, Yi Li didn't know that the reason Emo Jingli was so angry was because Yi Li was sitting right in front of them and listening to their conversation. Even though he had been drugged by Emo Jingqi, but no matter what, a man with this kind of problem would always make him feel awkward and unable to raise his head. Especially in front of a woman that he had always wanted. Emo Jingli sat in the chair and panted heavily. His eyes were red as he stared at Emo Shuyao. If it weren't for the fact that the difference in strength was too great, Yi Li believed that Emo Jingli would definitely pounce on Emo Shuyao without hesitation. After thinking seriously, Yi Li shook her head slightly and said, I don't think there's anything I want. For a moment, Yi Li really couldn't think of anything valuable to ask Emo Jingli that Emo Jingli was willing to give. Emo Shuyao smiled gently and said, Since Li can't think of anything, then let I think. Yi Li looked at him without commenting. Wasn't he the one who wanted to extort Emo Jingli? Emo Shuyao rubbed his chin and thought seriously for a moment before saying, Since Prince Li is so generous, I won't be polite. 1,000 threads snow robe, white jade phoenix zither, 9 dragons nation guarding seal, and Titan Emperor incineration sword. In addition, your nieces and nephews just turned a month old. Prince Li hasn't had time to send gifts. I remember that there's a shop called Agarwood Square. The children there are pretty good. Should be fine, right? Emo Shuyao. Emo Jingli's eyes were almost bloodshot. His eyes staring at Emo Shuyao could no longer be described with hatred. It wasn't that Emo Jingli was too stingy, but that Emo Shuyao was too greedy. That so-called Little Agarwood Square was the most profitable of all of Emo Jingli's private properties. For example, the 4 items he wanted, although they were only 4 items, the value of these 4 items was something that even if the entire treasury of the Chu Imperial Palace was sold, it might not be able to match. The 1,000 thread snow robe was made from the silk of snow silkworms that grew at the peak of the snowy lands. It was said that the number of snow silkworms was extremely small. Only a few of them died in a year. It would take more than 100 years to gather enough silk to weave a single piece of clothing. The snow robe was warm in winter and cool in summer. It was impervious to fire and water. It could be said to be the world's best defensive treasure. Most importantly, the art of weaving silk had long been lost in the world. The one in Dechu State's Imperial Palace was the only 1,000 threads snow robe in the world. If it hadn't been kept in the Dechu State's Imperial Palace, it would have caused a bloodbath in the world. The value of the other 3 items was also not below the snow robe. Among them, the incineration sword was said to be the first recorded sword of the Titan Emperor. Not to mention how the sword was still sharp after thousands of years. The sword itself was the symbol of the Imperial Palace's orthodox lineage. Emo Shuyao immediately asked for these 4 items. It could be said that he had dug up more than half of the Dechu State's Imperial Palace's treasury. This made Emo Jingli's heart ache. His heart was about to break. Moreover, he dared to ask for more. Seeing Emo Jingli bristle with anger, Emo Shuyao seemed to be even happier. He calmly continued, Also, King Li left behind some things in the north that he didn't dare to leave behind. King Li, do you want to take them back yourself or give them to I? Emo Jingli's pupils shrank. Of course, he understood what Emo Shuyao was talking about. Although the Dechu State's imperial court had already moved south, whether it was the Chu capital or the northwest, Emo Jingli still had many spies. And Emo Shuyao wanted him to remove all of them. Chapter 769. Don't even think about it. Emo Jingli gritted his teeth. Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled. King Li doesn't need to be so angry. When giving a gift, it has to be given willingly. If King Li can't bear to part with it, I naturally won't force it. Even though it's a bit of a pity, as long as the item is still there, we'll be able to see it sooner or later, right? Even if Emo Jingli doesn't give it, does it mean I can't get it? Emo Shuyao expressed his intentions to Emo Jingli without any hesitation. Emo Jingli was so angry that his face turned white. Helpless from the start, he was destined to be at a disadvantage in this exchange. Emo Shuyao wasn't in a rush. He smiled and said, King Li can go back and think about it before giving a reply. Ah, right, if King Li is interested in that second miss, you can also bring her back. Consider it I's return gift? Emo Jingli's face darkened. He glared fiercely at Emo Xiuyao before turning and leaving. Compared to what he had lost, even 100 Yiyus couldn't make up for it. What did he want Yiyu for? If he saw Yiyu right now, he would only want to strangle that woman to death. Seeing Emo Jingli leave, Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li didn't stay any longer and also left the Yi residence. Seeing that Emo Xiuyao had a rare smile on his face, Qin Feng and the others behind him couldn't help but put a large distance between them. Yi Li asked somewhat helplessly, Are you really that happy about scheming against Emo Jingli? Emo Xiuyao disdainfully curled his lips and said, Who's happy about that? With Emo Jingli's brain, it's easy for I to scheme against him. Then it's for the treasure? Seeing Emo Jingli's expression, Yi Li also understood that Emo Xiuyao's request must be extraordinary. Emo Xiuyao nodded happily. I have been looking for the snow thread robe for a few years now. Unfortunately, Emo Jingqi had hidden it too well. Even the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion could not find the entrance to the imperial palace. There's also the phoenix zither he. With it, young Master Qin Chen can at least work for us for another 20 years, right? Emo Xiuyao held Yi Li's hand as they walked. He happily discussed with Yi Li how to use the treasures after they obtained them. The impenetrable snow thread robe would naturally be given to Yi Li. The phoenix zither would be used to trick young Master Qin Chen into continuing to work for the Prince Ding mansion. As for the kingdom suppressing seal, it didn't have any practical use. However, it was said that there was a legendary book hidden within it. He could give it to Mr. Qin Yun to study. There was also the incineration sword. Although the Prince Ding mansion had many treasured swords, one of which was personally forged by the founding Prince Ding Emo Lanyun, the cloud-embracing sword. Although it could not be considered a legendary sword due to its recent age, it was still a rare divine weapon. However, compared to the legendary number 1 sword in the world, it was obviously not enough. Qin Feng and the others who were following behind them had black lines on their faces. Prince Li still hasn't agreed to give it to you. Emo Xiuyao, who was in an extremely good mood, did not care whether these things were his or not. If he took a fancy to something that was not his, it would become his sooner or later. Lowering his head to look at the beautiful and elegant girl beside him, Emo Xiuyao's lips curved into a satisfied smile. With the snow thread robe, he would be more assured of Li's safety in the future. Li, let's go shopping. Shopping? Yi Li looked up and asked with some confusion. Other things were fine, but in these past few years they really did not go shopping. Even if they were free, they would go out of the city for a walk. The most important reason was that Emo Xiuyao's white hair was too dazzling. Even people who had never seen them before would naturally remember their identity when they saw the white-haired young man in Glass City. Wherever they went, they would be surrounded by people. It was better to go out of the city to a place with fewer people. Emo Xiuyao smiled and said, Glass City is more lively than usual these days. Li and I worked so hard to manage Glass City. Shouldn't we go and enjoy the people? Let's go. He did not care whether Yi Li agreed or not. He pulled Yi Li and walked in the direction with the most people on the street. The guards following behind saw the prince pull princess into the crowd like the wind and looked at each other. Commander Qin, what do we do? Qin Feng rubbed his chin and said, A few people follow from a distance. Everyone else go back to your fu. Don't get too close and let the prince and princess find out. It was clear that the prince wanted to spend some time with princess. If they disturbed the prince's mood, they would be the unlucky ones. The guards behind him had bitter smiles. It was a very difficult task to follow the prince and princess without being discovered. The two held hands as they walked in the crowd. As expected, they attracted many people's attention. Not to mention Emo Xiuyao's white hair that showed his identity, just the two's appearance and aura was enough to attract most people's attention. Even though they were surrounded by people, it was a good thing that Glass City's people were very polite and did not go up to disturb them. But the people of Glass City knew, the people of Dechu State knew, maybe the guests of Xiling and Nanzhao knew, but there were still a few people who did not know their identity. So when the two stood in a newly opened shop that sold goods from the western regions and heard the tall boss of the western regions, who was completely different from the people of the Central Plains, speak to Yi Li in a strange Central Plains accent, Emo Xiuyao's face instantly turned green. This was a shop that sold all kinds of exquisite jewelry from the western regions. Even though the porcelain and gold products of the Central Plains could be said to be at the peak, the countries of the western regions had unique craftsmanship in gold and stone, especially precious stones, and had a different style. And this young merchant who came all the way to Glass City to open a shop clearly had the genes of a romantic country. When he saw Yili come in, he immediately ignored Emo Xiuyao, who was standing beside her, and took out the most exquisite jewelry in his shop to curry favor with Yili. He also said that if Yili liked it, he could give it to her for free. Of course, if the beautiful Miss Dongfang could do him the honor of having afternoon tea with him, that would be even better. In this life, this was the first time someone hit on her like this. Of course, this was also because there were only a few people in this world who were so passionate and unrestrained. Even if there were one or two of them, they would be classified as lechers. Not knowing whether to laugh or cry as she looked at this tall and handsome Western Regions man in front of her, Yili shook her head and pulled Emo Xiuyao, who was about to explode, out of the shop. The Western Regions merchant behind them held his most exquisite jewelry and felt sad. Why did the beautiful Miss Dongfang pull that white-haired man and leave without looking back? Could it be that white hair was more beautiful than his blonde hair and more attractive? The local waiter of Glass City, who was hiding at the side, silently watched his boss's suicidal actions. After thinking about it, he decided to tell his boss. After all, although this Western Region's boss who had just arrived was a bit strange, he was still very good to people. If he died in a foreign land because he provoked someone he shouldn't have, that would be too tragic. He went forward and told him about Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li's identities. He also emphasized that the prince and princess were very close and had a very good relationship. The blonde young man who had just heard this immediately shouted, "You're saying that beautiful miss is a princess?" The waiter nodded and the blonde young man instantly went crazy. "But that miss looks like she's only 15 or 16 years old. I heard that the powerful princess should already be the mother of 3 children. Chapter 770. The shop assistant silently rolled his eyes. "You don't look like you're just 20 years old. People from the West always look old. Anyway, boss, the princess consort is older than you. There are many beautiful ladies in Glass City. Don't provoke the princess consort anymore. You'll die. Even if the prince doesn't kill you, the people of Glass City will kill you." The beautiful love that had just sprouted was cruelly strangled in the beginning by the nameless shop assistant. They were indeed a passionate and unrestrained people. The blonde young man was dispirited for a moment before he became lively again. "Dearly, I just met the highest ruler here. Heavens, I didn't even greet him. That's so rude. Quickly prepare a gift. I want to personally pay him a visit. I heard that your king is a very wise person, although I didn't notice him just now. However, someone who is worthy of the beautiful princess consort should be a good king. He definitely won't mind doing business with me." He was the second son of a wealthy merchant in the West. According to the family's rules, the eldest son could inherit almost all of the family's wealth. The other sons could only inherit a small amount of wealth that was enough for them to live a carefree life or start a business. The young second son of the family took the money and traveled thousands of miles to the east, where the land was said to be filled with gold. Although it wasn't to the point where the land was filled with gold, he felt that he could earn a lot of money here. He could even build a business that didn't belong to his family. Thinking of this, the blonde young man couldn't help but dance with joy. "It's so beautiful." Although the beautiful princess consort is already married, the princess consort might still have a younger sister who hasn't married yet. But you're right. There are many beauties in this city. Yesterday I saw a beautiful lady. Perhaps she isn't married yet and is willing to accept my love? The shop assistant with the surname Li silently rolled his eyes and turned to prepare the gift. However, he could foresee that his employer would be mercilessly chased out of the Prince Ding mansion. He might even be beaten to death by the people of Glass City for taking liberties with a woman. After leaving the shop, Emo Xiuyao's expression was still ugly. Yili laughed as she held onto his arm and looked up. "That person looks like he just arrived in the Central Plains and doesn't know the rules of the Central Plains. Why are you angry with him?" Emo Xiuyao gritted his teeth. "I want to close down his shop and chase him out of Glass City. How dare he covet his Li? I'll make sure he dies." Yili shook her head and said, "He didn't mean that. Maybe it's the nature of their country." Yili could see that the young man didn't mean anything bad. Just like some romantic Western people, when they saw a beautiful girl, they went up to her to express their affection. If there was a chance, he might develop further. Most of the time it would just be a cup of tea. Emo Shuyao snorted lightly. Of course he could see the sincerity and pure admiration in that person's eyes. But even so he was still unhappy. Well, let him be. Didn't you say you were going shopping with me? How can you go shopping with such a sullen face? Yili said with a smile. It was rare for him to go out with Lili, so Emo Shuyao naturally didn't want to spoil the mood. Only then did he throw the matter to the back of his mind and walk with Yili in the crowd. On the busiest street in Glass City, in a tea house on the side of the street, one could clearly see the situation on the street through the open windows. Inside the window, a few men and women with extraordinary appearances sat facing each other. Beside Rin Qining sat Queen Helan and Imperial concubine Yun, and opposite Yelu Yi sat Qin Yaina, who still had a veil on her face. The women of the northern region had always been straightforward. Queen Helan looked down on Imperial concubine Lu, who was secretive and looked down on everyone with a pair of cold eyes. Pursing her bright red lips, she said with a smile, "Seventh Prince, when did you northern tribes women learn the pretentious ways of the Central Plains?" As she spoke, she casually glanced at Imperial concubine Yun, who was sitting on the other side of Rin Qining. Clearly, the pretentious words were directed at her. But even the pretentious Imperial concubine Yun did not wear a veil on her face. Being secretly mocked by Queen Helan, Imperial concubine Yun was naturally furious. But she also looked down on the woman in white opposite her. At a glance, she knew that this woman was from the Central Plains. Following the seventh prince of the northern tribes, she even took the name of the northern tribes. She was so secretive that it seemed like she could not be seen. She actually dared to look at her with that kind of disdain. Who did she think she was? Sister Queen, you're wrong. Although the women of the Central Plains are not as straightforward and generous as the women of the northern region, they are also open. Except for unmarried daughters, no one hides their heads and shows their tails. If she was an unmarried woman, she naturally should not follow a man everywhere. Since she followed a man everywhere, what was the point of covering her face? Imperial concubine Lu was mercilessly mocked by these two women, and her cold eyes seemed to freeze. King of the northern region, are the women in your palace all fond of gossiping? Or did Emo Shuyao kill all the women of your northern region before bringing these two women out to make a fool of yourself? As soon as these words came out, not only Queen Helan and Imperial concubine Yun, but also Rin Qining's expression changed. He stared at Imperial concubine Lu for a long time with gloomy eyes, and then said to Yelu Yi lightly, "Brother Yelu, your fiancé is interesting." This time it was Imperial concubine Lu's turn to look ugly. Just like how she disdained to quarrel with Queen Helan and Imperial concubine Yun and directly talked to Rin Qining. Rin Qining ignored her and directly talked to Yelu Yi, which also showed that he disdained to argue with a woman. Yelu Yi vaguely gave Imperial concubine Lu a warning look. Although Imperial concubine Lu was angry, she could only secretly suppress the anger in her heart. Queen Helan looked at Yelu Yi, then looked at Imperial concubine Lu and said with a smile, "I am indeed not as good as my cousin, but I am still presentable, right? Seventh Prince, there are still many suitable women in the northern region who are suitable to be wives. Your woman is not good." Imperial concubine Yun did not care about the fight with Queen Helan at this time, and asked gloatingly, "What's not good about her? I think this girl is very beautiful." "She's too old. A woman of this age in the northern region can be a grandmother," Queen Helan said without any trace of politeness. The women of the northern tribes married at an earlier age than the women of the Central Plains. There were really many women of Imperial concubine Lu's age who could be a grandmother or grandmother. No matter how beautiful Imperial concubine Lu was, some traces of age could not be concealed. Chapter 771. Age was definitely the most untouchable taboo for every woman, especially for a stunning beauty who was no longer young. A beauty in her twilight years and a general with white hair was the most helpless thing in the world. Therefore, even the arrogant noble consort Lu, who was unwilling to lower herself to the level of a foreign woman like Queen Helan, was still enraged. "Bitch, what did you say?" Noble consort Lu was trembling with anger as she glared at Queen Helan and snapped. Queen Helan was only 16 or 17 years old this year. She was really at the age of a flower. Although she didn't have the delicate and fair complexion of the women of the Central Plains, her young complexion still looked healthy and delicate under the sun. This was exactly what noble consort Lu lacked at her age. No matter how exquisite her makeup was, no matter how hard she tried to maintain her youthful skin in her 30s, she would never have the tender skin of a young girl. What's more, she had suffered for a long time in the past 2 years, which almost made her years of maintenance go to waste. Although she had tried her best to maintain herself in the past 2 years, her complexion could never return to its peak. Queen Helen's words undoubtedly sprinkled a handful of salt on her wound mercilessly. Presumptuous. Queen Helen's face darkened. She raised her chin and stared at noble consort Lu proudly. Seeing that you are Prince Yelu's woman, I will yield to you. Believe it or not, I will smash your face and you won't be the royal consort of the northern tribes. I don't believe that the king of the northern tribes will make trouble for me because of this. Noble consort Lu glared at Queen Helen as if poisoned. Yelu Yi frowned and said in a deep voice, "All right, Queen Helen." Qing Yaina spoke without thinking, "Please forgive her. However, you also spoke rudely first. Why don't we just let it go?" Queen Helen glanced at Ren Qining, who obviously didn't intend to stand up for her, snorted and turned her head away without speaking. Noble consort Lu was originally unwilling, but under Yelu Ye's warning gaze she gave up. "Hey, isn't that Prince Ding and Princess Ding?" Queen Helen looked out of the window and saw Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li strolling hand in hand in the crowd. In the crowd of black-haired people, Mo Xiaoyao's white hair was naturally very conspicuous. Hearing this, the others also looked over. Sure enough, he saw an outstanding man and woman walking side by side in the crowd. The two of them held hands as they chatted and laughed. Mo Xiaoyao was wearing a light green robe with silver embroidery. A jade belt was tied around his waist, and his long silver hair was casually draped over his shoulders. He lowered his head and looked at the black-haired woman beside him. His light laughter was completely different from his usual indifference and coldness. The woman standing beside him had black hair that was tied up in a loose bun. She casually dabbed a purple-stamped hibiscus flower, and a delicate silver dangling hairpin gently swayed beside her ear, which made her beautiful face even more elegant and graceful, causing people to be unwilling to look sideways. Yi Li was wearing a very simple white robe with silver embroidery, and a light purple jade pendant was tied to her silver belt. The two of them were obviously not dressed formally, but as they walked in the crowd, everyone's eyes couldn't help but follow them. It wasn't clear what Mo Xiaoyao said, but Yi Li angrily glared at him. She raised her hand to snatch the thing in his hand, but Mo Xiaoyao let her pass with a smile. He held her waist with one hand and brought the thing in his hand to her lips with the other. Only then did the crowd see clearly that Mo Xiaoyao was holding a stick of candied haws. Ren Qining and Yelu Yi couldn't help but twitch their mouths. With their status, no matter which woman they doted on, they would never do such a thing. But seeing Mo Xiaoyao do it so calmly and without any pretense, it was obvious that he was enjoying it. I've long heard that Prince Ding and Princess are deeply in love. Seeing it today, I know that the rumors are true. Imperial concubine Yun sighed faintly, and it was difficult to hide her envy for Princess Ding in her tone. Queen Helen also rarely agreed with Imperial concubine Yun's words. Prince Ding is an amazing man. Yelu Ye's mouth twitched. The standard of a good man was to buy candied haws on the street? Seeing his indifference, Queen Helen said unhappily, "Seventh Prince, can you buy candied haws on the street for any woman?" Yelu Yi curled his lips in disdain. How could he, a prince, do such a degrading thing for a woman? Queen Helen was even more disdainful. "I originally thought that only the men of the Central Plains were so hypocritical, but I didn't expect you northern tribes people to be the same. The men of the northern region are not as hypocritical as you. Every one of them is a good man like Prince Ding." Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li were about to pass by downstairs, Queen Helen stood up and said with a smile, "Prince Ding, Princess Ding." Downstairs, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao looked up and saw Queen Helen waving happily at them. Of course, there was also Ren Qining and Yelu Yi, whose expressions were not very good. Ren Qining and Yelu Yi had formed an alliance to fight against the Mahist army, so it was not surprising that the two of them would appear at the same tea house. But the two families had colluded under the eyes of the Mahist army in Li City. They really did not put the Prince Ding mansion in their eyes. Yi Li's lips curled into a faint smile. She nodded at Queen Helen and said with a smile, "The Queen is also here, what a coincidence." Queen Helen leaned against the window and said with a smile, "Prince Ding and Princess Fei are out shopping, why don't you come up and sit together?" Deference is no substitute for obedience. Yili smiled and agreed. She pulled Emo Xiuyao into the tea house. The two had just entered when the shopkeeper of the tea house came up to greet them with an excited expression. Even though Prince Ding and Princess Fei lived in Li City, the two usually did not go out. It was no wonder that the shopkeeper was so excited that they could visit this small tea house. Looking at the excited and bewildered shopkeeper, Yili nodded with a smile and said, "Shopkeeper, don't mind us, we can go up ourselves." The shopkeeper naturally nodded and carefully snuck a glance at Prince Ding, who was standing next to Princess Fei. The prince holding the candied haws was really beyond the scope of what normal people could accept. He didn't dare to go up and make small talk. He could only watch as Yili pulled Emo Xiuyao upstairs. Rin Qining's group did not sit in the side room, but the shopkeeper knew that their status was special. The place where they sat had the best view and the quietest place in the entire tea house. Separated by a folding screen of mountains and rivers, it formed a world of its own. It had the meaning of finding peace in the midst of chaos. Seeing the two come in hand, Rin Qining and Yelu Ye's gaze involuntarily landed on Emo Xiuyao's other hand. Even though the candied haws were gone, Prince Ding, who was holding the dessert box in his hand, was still unbearable. This feeling was like a deity worshipped by all living beings in the ninth heaven, but someone suddenly told you that deities also needed to eat, drink, and defecate. Facing Rin Qining and Yelu Ye's strange gazes, Emo Xiuyao did not care. He casually put the dessert on the table. Only then did everyone see the words "Tasting Lotus House" on the box. This was Li City's most famous dessert. Queen Helan's eyes lit up. "This is Tasting Lotus House's dessert? Their desserts are the best. I went there twice and had to wait in a long line." Chapter 772. Emo Xiuyao and Yili obviously didn't need to line up. Even if they were willing, the customers in front of them would immediately give up their seats. Emo Xiuyao smiled faintly. "Not bad, Li also likes it. If the queen likes it, you can try it." Queen Helan didn't hold back and said with a smile, "Then many thanks to Prince Ding. Prince Ding really is a good person." Everyone present couldn't help but twitch. Prince Ding was a good person. How many bad people were there in this world? As if she didn't see the expressions of others, Queen Helan happily ate the desserts. Of course, she wouldn't forget to give half to the original owner of the desserts. In just a few short years, Glass City has become so prosperous. Prince Ding and Princess Consort are truly good at governing. Yelu Yi said in a low voice. Yelu Yi had attended Emo Xiaobao's full moon celebration, so he naturally saw the changes in Glass City. Just the area alone had more than doubled. Not to mention, now that the Emperor of Xiling City and the Chu capital had declined, Glass City could be said to be the most prosperous city in the world. The northern tribes were barren, and the northern tribes' people lived by water and grass. Even if there were a few cities, they weren't large. Even the most prosperous royal house of the northern tribes couldn't compare to a second-rate city in the Central Plains. Therefore, the prosperity of the Central Plains made the northern tribes' people envious. Although the northern tribes had many cities that they had seized from the Dechu state, the northern tribes' people were brave and invincible in war, but governing a country wasn't something that could be trusted just by fighting. In Yelu Ye's hands, the city that was originally considered to be in a good condition was now in a state of decline, like the sun setting in the west. Emo Xiuyao said faintly, "Seventh Prince is overpraising. Compared to the Chu capital and Jiangnan, the northwest is still very barren. I'm just doing my best." The two men didn't think much of his modesty. No matter how prosperous and rich Emo Jingli was in Jiangnan, there was nothing to worry about. But Emo Xiuyao was different. At least in the short term, no one dared to take anything from him. Although these days in Glass City, in order to avoid suspicion and show respect to the master, the nobles of the various countries did not interact much. However, they all had their own sources of information. At the very least, the West Hill, which had lost a large amount of land but had recovered it from the Dechu state, had no intention of provoking Emo Xiuyao for the time being. Enchanting focused his attention on Emo Jingli of Jiangnan instead. If that was the case, they would have to think twice before going against Emo Xiuyao. After all, regardless of whether they could win or not, if they ended up benefiting others, then the losses would outweigh the gains. As for Yelu Yi, for the time being, he no longer had any plans to start a war with Emo Xiuyao. Within the northern militant kingdom, there was news that his brother, the crown prince, was on the move. In addition, during this period of time, the battle with the Mahist army had been intense. This made his mind, which had been blinded by victory, clear up a little. If his brother, the crown prince, gained the upper hand within the kingdom, then even if he defeated Emo once or twice, it would be of no use. Unless he could completely wipe out the Mahist army, otherwise it would just be a waste of his own strength. Thinking about how Yelu Hong's relationship with the Prince Ding mansion was much more harmonious than his own, Yelu Ye's heart moved slightly. Looking at Emo Xiuyao, his gaze became more clear and deep. Prince Ding, I have a business deal that I would like to discuss with Prince Ding. What do you think? Business deal? Emo Xiuyao seemed to have heard a joke. Seventh Prince, your northern militant army is still eyeing the border like a tiger watching its prey. What business deal do you want to discuss with I? Yelu Yi smiled carelessly. There is a saying in the Central Plains. There are no eternal friends, only eternal benefits. At the same time, there are no eternal enemies, right? Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows. That seems to make sense. Why don't Seventh Prince say it? Rin Qining, who was sitting opposite, saw that Yelu Yi wanted to discuss a business deal with Emo Xiuyao in front of him. His face immediately turned ugly. After all, the northern region and the northern militant army were allies. Yelu Yi, of course, would not offend Rin Qining. He smiled and said, in fact, this matter is beneficial to everyone. I wonder if the northern region king is interested? Rin Qining said indifferently, I'm all ears. Beside them, Queen Helan frowned. What's wrong with you men? Didn't you say that you came out to play? Now that you're sitting together, you're talking about these annoying things. I don't want to listen to your nonsense. Hearing this, Rin Qining frowned in displeasure. In that case, the queen should return to the post house first. Return what? I haven't had enough fun yet. Queen Helan unceremoniously refuted his words, which succeeded in making Rin Qining's face even uglier. Yi Li stood up and said with a faint smile, in that case, why don't Queen Helan come out with me for a walk, so that this consort can show her hospitality? Queen Helan's eyes lit up. She happily stepped forward and pulled Yi Li's arm. Where is the princess taking me to play? There are so many people in Glass City, so many interesting things. I want to buy some more. Yi Li smiled. When the queen leaves, I'll have someone send you whatever the queen likes. Princess Ding, you're really a good person. Let's go. After saying that, she did not care about the other people's reactions and hurriedly pulled Yi Li downstairs. Yi Li waved her hand at Emo Xiuyao, indicating that it was fine, and followed Queen Helan downstairs. Emo Xiuyao frowned. From the window, he watched the guards waiting outside the tea house follow them up. Only then did he feel relieved and sit back down. Prince Ding's affection for the princess is really enviable. Noble consort Lu stared at Emo Xiuyao and gritted her teeth. Looking at Emo Xiuyao, who was still handsome and had white hair, she felt awe-inspiring. Noble consort Lu's heart felt as if it was bitten by a poisonous snake. Emo Xiuyao was 1 or 2 years older than her. If the two looked about the same age 2 years ago, now if noble consort Lu took off her veil, even if she was still beautiful, she seemed to be a few years older than Emo Xiuyao. Emo Xiuyao acted as if he didn't hear. He lowered his head and took a sip of tea. He said to Yelu Yi, what is the deal, Prince Yelu, please say it. The woman who was ignored, even the beautiful face under her face was twisted and ferocious. In another jewelry store in the city not far from the tea house, Yi Li and Queen Helan sat across from each other in a quiet room on the second floor. Yi Li leisurely tasted the new tea that the shopkeeper had personally delivered, smiling as she watched Queen Helan curiously play with the various exquisite jewelry on the table. After a while, Yi Li asked softly, does Queen Helan have something to say to this consort? Hearing this, Queen Helan put down the jewelry in her hand and raised her head. The arrogant and curious smile on her face gradually disappeared. It was replaced by the determination rarely seen in women of the Central Plains and the wisdom and calmness rarely seen in women of the northern region. The sudden change made the originally arrogant young woman look a little more imposing. Queen Helan nodded and said with a smile, I knew I couldn't hide it from Princess Ding. Yi Li smiled and said, the queen showed goodwill to this consort on the first day. If this consort couldn't see through it, wouldn't I disappoint the queen? It's just that I don't know what matter the queen wants to discuss in private without the northern region king. Queen Helan looked deeply at Yi Li and said in a deep voice, I want to cooperate with King Ding's mansion. Oh, it should be. We, the people of the northern region, want to cooperate with the Prince Ding mansion. Chapter 773. People from the northern region? Yili paused for a moment and said, "Isn't it the northern region?" There were now two kinds of people in the northern region. The native people of the northern region and the Central Plains people who claimed to be the survivors of the previous dynasty. These so-called survivors of the previous dynasty were just the people of Dechu state who had turned to Rin Qining or had been taken in by him in recent years. Rin Qining trusted the Central Plains people more. If he wanted to restore the orthodoxy of the previous dynasty, he would have to suppress the people of the northern region and even abandon them completely in the end. Otherwise, his so-called orthodoxy of the Central Plains would not live up to its name and would not be accepted by the Central Plains literati. Unless he was willing to use the northern region as the country's name and rule the Central Plains as a foreign race. But in this way, not only would he be resisted several times or even hundreds of times more than before. Even the Central Plains people who were originally loyal to him might betray him. From the very beginning, there had been irreconcilable contradictions between the two tribes. That was why Mr. Qingyun told Rin Qining that he was wrong from the beginning. After pondering for a moment, Yili asked curiously, "Can Queen Helan make such a decision?" Queen Helan raised her head and said proudly, "Since I'm here, I can naturally make the decision. Our northern region is not like your Central Plains, who only lock their daughters in their boudoirs. We can do what men can do. Our family has always had few children and I have no brothers or sisters. After my father passes away, I should take over the position of patriarch. And after my cousin passes away, according to the rules, her family should be replaced by me or my children. But those annoying Central Plains people around Rin Qining control the rights of the people of the northern region. We just want to take back what belongs to us." Yili had considered doing something through Queen Helan, but she did not expect the young Queen Helan to be such an important person. She was a little surprised for a moment, but she had always been calm, so Queen Helan naturally could not see through her thoughts. Yili looked at her and said softly, "I heard that the former queen of the northern region was also a beautiful woman, but unfortunately, we didn't have the chance to meet." Queen Helan's eyes suddenly turned red at the mention of this. "If it weren't for Rin Qining, how could my cousin have wronged herself like that? My cousin gave up the position of clan leader for him, and he went to guard against my cousin everywhere, letting those women anger her. He even found an opportunity to kill all the people his cousin trusted. If it wasn't for cousin saving him back then, how could this ungrateful bastard be where he is today?" Looking at Queen Helan's angry appearance, Yili sighed in her heart. With Rin Qining's martial arts and influence, how could he be in danger in a place like the northern region? He was afraid that the encounter back then was a conspiracy. However, Rin Qining was willing to spend money for his so-called great cause. "Queen, I think you should know. Your cousin's death." This wasn't a secret anyway, so Yili thought it was best to make it clear. Otherwise, she didn't want to be stabbed in the back in the middle of a collaboration. Queen Helan said firmly, "I know. My father said that these grievances can be put aside for the time being. We people in the northern region are trustworthy. As long as Princess helps us drive Rin Qining out, we won't go against the Prince Ding mansion." Yili raised her eyebrows and smiled, "If so, what benefits can I get?" Queen Helan said, "The army of the northern region will all return to the original border with the Dechu state. Although your Central Plains is good, our northern region's White Mountain Blackwater is not bad. We just want to live our own lives." It wasn't that the people in the northern region had no ambition at all, but that the development of the people in the northern region hadn't reached the point where they could bear their ambition. Before Rin Qining appeared in the northern region was inhabited by tribes. The people in the northern region also lived a life of fishing and hunting. Not to mention that the people in the Central Plains generally farmed. They didn't even raise horses and sheep like the northern tribes. The residents were naturally very simple, and Rin Qining brought too many changes. However, not everyone could accept the earth-shaking changes in less than 20 years. From the occasional fighting between tribes in the past to the current fighting with the regular Dechu state and the Mahist army, the people in the northern region suffered the heaviest losses. The people in the northern region were not stupid. It was almost foreseeable that if this continued, even if Rin Qining really unified the world one day, the people in the northern region would probably die out. Therefore, they decided to drive Rin Qining and his cronies out and take back the rights that belonged to the people in the northern region. Perhaps one day they would also participate in this battle for supremacy, but that was a matter for a very, very long time in the future. It was definitely not now. Yili was silent for a long time before she nodded and said, Queen Helen's proposal is very tempting. If Queen Helen sincerely cooperates, then I think it's possible. Such a straightforward reply made Queen Helen stunned for a moment. In her impression, the people of the Central Plains always liked to think twice before acting. It was rare to see someone as clear-cut as Yili. Princess, can you make the decision? Yili smiled. If I can't make the decision, wouldn't it be a loss for the queen to come to me? Queen Helen was a little apologetic. I originally wanted to ask the princess to pass a message to Prince Ding for me. Moreover, I also heard that the princess is very powerful. Maybe Princess Ding can help me persuade Prince Ding. Prince Ding may not be willing to cooperate with me. You Central Plains people always like women to intervene in these things. Yili smiled and said, I can make the decision. But the queen has to let me see the sincerity of the northern region, right? Otherwise, how can I trust the queen? Queen Helen nodded and solemnly took out a box and put it in front of Yili, saying, This contains the sacred object of my ancestors in the northern region. With it, you can exchange all the people of the northern region's 26 clans to do one thing for you. As long as you mention it, all the people of the northern region will go through water and tread on fire for you. This is the most honorable treasure of our northern region. For the time being, the princess will keep it. Yili opened the box. The inside of the box was covered with brown patterned animal skin, which looked like the skin of a tiger. There was a short knife on the animal skin. It looked a little rough, but many of the engravings on it had been blurred and rounded. Obviously, it had been there for a long time. The material of the short knife was neither iron nor copper. It was not a common jade knife, but seemed to be made of stone. Although Yili was not superstitious about the binding force of tokens, she also knew that some people believed in the so-called sacred objects. The queen is not afraid that I won't return it? Queen Helen said seriously, if so, the northern region will do everything to bring back the sacred object. But I believe that the princess and Prince Ding are not such people. Yili put away the box and nodded. Tomorrow at the latest, the prince and I will give the queen an answer. Only then did Queen Helen reveal a smile. She nodded and said, Thank you, Your Highness. Chapter 774. After Yili and Queen Helen finished their discussion and reached a satisfactory agreement, Queen Helen happily followed Yili downstairs with a large pile of adjusted jewelry. After this deep conversation, both of them had a deeper understanding of each other, and their admiration and respect for each other increased. As soon as they went downstairs, they saw Emo Xiaoyao and the others sitting in the parlor downstairs waiting for them. Not only were Emo Xiaoyao and Ren Qining looking for them, but even Yelu Yi and Noble Consort Lu were there. Noble Consort Lu and Consort Yun couldn't help but have a strange look in their eyes when they saw Queen Helen holding boxes of various sizes and wearing exquisite jewelry on the flying fairy bun, which was very popular among the women of the Central Plains. Fenghua Building was originally a property under the Prince Ding Mansion, and it was also one of the best jewelry shops in the entire Dechu state. The things it made were naturally exquisite, and there was no woman who didn't like to tidy them up. Seeing them come down, Emo Xiaoyao stood up and stepped forward to take Yili's hand. He smiled at Queen Helen and said, It seems that the queen is very satisfied with the jewelry here? Queen Helen smiled happily and said, Yes, the jewelry of the Central Plains is really beautiful. Princess Ding said that you can give these to me. Is it true? Emo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, Since Princess Li said so, of course it's possible. It's Princess Ding's honor that the queen likes them. Queen Helen held the boxes in her hands, her fondness overflowing in her words. Then I won't be polite. Thank you, Prince Ding and Princess. You're welcome, Queen. Yili smiled as she watched the two of them exchange greetings. She asked in confusion, Why are you here? Emo Xiaoyao said softly, I heard that you came to Fenghua Building, so I came to wait for you. Why is Queen Helen the only one to choose? Didn't Princess Li like anything? Yili waved her hand and said, I can't use those. Let's leave them first. She did have a lot of jewelry, but she didn't really use many of them. Many of them were placed there as decorations or given away. Emo Xiaoyao didn't care and said with a smile, A few days ago, Fenghua Building found a very good piece of white jade. I'll make a hairpin for you later. Prince Ding was so gentle and considerate that the women standing next to him were envious and jealous. Imperial concubine Yun could not help but praise. Prince Ding and Princess really have a good relationship. Your Majesty, don't you think so? She nodded her head. Princess Ding Mansion, Queen and Queen Helan, Princess Helan and consort. I have many beautiful pearls. I'll get someone to send them to you later, okay? The beautiful sea was CC. Beautiful she. Beautiful of course, some. Yili didn't hold back and said with a smile, then many thanks to Queen Helan. Rin Chi Ning left with Princess Helan and consort Yun. Noble consort Lu, who wanted to say something, was also taken away by Yelu Yi. Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li happily walked out of Fenghua building and headed in the direction of Princess Ding. Just by looking at the happy expressions on their faces, it was clear that both sides were very satisfied with this negotiation. Before they reached the entrance of the Prince Ding mansion, they heard that it wasn't as quiet and solemn as usual. Instead, it was a little noisy. Walking forward, they saw a very familiar figure. The golden-haired young man also saw them and immediately flashed his bright white teeth, running toward them. Beautiful princess consort, it's great to see you here. Emo Shuyao's face was gloomy. Is that so? I don't think it's good. What are you doing at the Prince Ding mansion? It's best if you're here to cause trouble. I will have a reason to arrest you then. Emo Shuyao's mind darkly filled in all kinds of ways to torture people. Although the golden-haired man couldn't see Emo Shuyao's thoughts, his intuition still made him tremble and turn toward Yili. Yili smiled helplessly. Who are you? What business do you have at the Prince Ding mansion? The golden-haired man smiled excitedly. Of course there's business. I'm a merchant from the western region's Jiaolon country. My name is Lance. I want to do business with the owner of this city. Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and said indifferently, aren't you doing business in Glass City right now? Or do you have something special to sell to I? The golden-haired man shook his head. No, I want to do a very, very big business. There are many magical things in the east. I want to sell them to the west, even further away. When I was young, I went there with my father. The people there have a lot of gold, but they don't have beautiful silk, beautiful porcelain, or magical tea. If I sell my country, I'll quickly become a rich man. At least the golden-haired man knew how to read people's expressions. Seeing that Emo Shuyao's expression wasn't very good, he added, of course there's also you. We'll all become the richest people. When he spoke excitedly, the golden-haired man began to dance with his hands and feet. Emo Shuyao and Yi Li exchanged glances. The Prince Ding mansion was very rich, but they didn't mind having more money. After all, fighting wars and raising an army had always been a money-burning job. Why don't you come in with us and we can talk about it in detail? Yi Li said with a faint smile. Of course, it's my honor. Beautiful princess. The golden-haired man said happily. His employee had warned him that he might be kicked out, but he was very lucky to get a chance on the first try. The heavens really favored those who were diligent and knew how to seize opportunities. The young man thought happily. He seemed to see countless glittering gold waving at him. Beautiful. Emo Shuyao, who was walking in front, sneered. He waved his hand to summon the guards. Call Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi over. And young Master Qingchen, let them deal with this guy. The young merchant from the western region called Lance followed the guards into the large Prince Ding's residence with a face full of excitement. The white-haired monarch told him that he didn't know much about business, so he had to wait for someone to come and talk to him. He also suggested that he stroll around the mansion's garden. This made Lance's impression of Prince Ding rise exponentially. After seeing countless superiors who pretended to know what they didn't know, this monarch who had the courage to admit his weakness was so great. No wonder this city was more prosperous and stable than any other city he had ever seen. In June, the Prince Ding mansion was still full of flowers. Lance curiously looked at these flowers unique to the east, and wondered if he could bring them back to the western regions to plant. Just as he was admiring the beautiful scenery in the garden, he saw two people walking towards him. The two figures, one red and one white, were particularly eye-catching in the garden full of blooming flowers. Lance's gaze was firmly fixed on the figure in red. Her tall and slender figure as well as her beautiful face. Her black hair was casually tied up with a ribbon, and there was a lazy smile on her lips. All of them gave people a strange sense of beauty. Chapter 775. Although she was not as gentle and delicate as the beautiful princess consort, she had a different style. Thus, Lance once again ignored the man in white beside the woman in red and ran over with a flower in his hand. Beautiful Miss Dongfeng, may I have the honor of having afternoon tea with you? If you are not married like the beautiful princess consort, please consider accepting my deep love. The two people in front of him were stunned. They were obviously shocked by this sudden display of love. After a while, the woman in red asked in a low voice, "What did you say?" Lance was stunned. This lady's voice seemed to be worse than the beautiful princess consort's. But a perfect beauty like the princess consort was probably rare. However, this red-clothed beauty was also a rare beauty. If you are not married, please accept my deep love. Lance raised his head and said sincerely. Bang! What answered him was a fierce and heavy punch. Lance was hit so hard that his head was in a daze. He could not react for a moment and shook his head. Beautiful little... Bang! Han Mingxi mercilessly punched him, turning the blonde man's original image from a lowly dog into a national treasure. I scared your dog eyes, I am a man. The Dongfeng lady, who was originally aggrieved and too violent, was stunned. Then he looked seriously at Han Mingxi's red clothes and handsome face. Only then did he notice that this beauty in red was about the same height as him. And Han Mingyue next to him looked at her angry brother, then looked at the blonde man with a pair of panda eyes. She could not help but lower her head and laugh. Brother! Han Mingxi flew into a rage out of humiliation. He broke free from Han Mingyue's hand. Don't stop me, I want to kill him. Alright, he is probably a guest of the Prince Ding mansion. You can just punch him a few times to vent your anger. Isn't Princess Ding still waiting for you to discuss matters? Han Mingyue advised. After listening to her brother's words, Han Mingyue angrily gave up the plan to continue beating Lance. She fiercely threw a sharp glare at him and went to Yi Li's study. Lance, who was following behind, looked dispirited. He actually confessed to a man. Just the thought of it gave him goosebumps. Shaking, Lance decided to follow his employee's advice and ask the matchmaker to introduce him to a gentle and beautiful lady as a wife. The East was too scary. He couldn't tell the difference between men and women. The worst thing was that they all had long hair. Poor Lance would never know why he was punched twice. In Yi Li's study, when Han Mingxi and the others arrived, Mo Xiuyao and Su Qingchen were already there. Seeing Lance's new look, Yi Li was a little stunned. Similarly, when Lance saw Su Qingchen, who was more handsome than Han Mingxi, and then looked at Han Mingxi, who was still waiting for him fiercely, he blinked and lowered his head. Looking at his pitiful eyes, young Master Qingchen's mouth twitched and he raised his eyebrows doubtfully. No one saw that someone sitting next to Yi Li lowered his head to drink tea, with a triumphant smile on his lips. Although Lance's matter was very important, it didn't mean much to Prince Ding at present. Even if he cooperated with Lance, he wouldn't be able to see the benefits in a short time. So after briefly explaining the plan, this matter was directly handed over to Han Mingxi to deal with. All these years Han Mingyue had been hanging around in a lukewarm manner. Mo Xiuyao didn't mean to pay attention to him. Anyway, if Han Mingxi was in trouble, Han Mingyue would naturally solve it for him. Although he didn't have much friendship with Han Mingyue, at least Han Mingyue's brain was very good. If he could use it for free, why not? After dismissing Han Mingxi and the other two, Mo Xiuyao and the other two sat down to discuss business again. After listening to Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li's description of today's trip, young Master Su's attention was focused on the phoenix zither that had yet to be obtained, and not the fact that Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li had schemed against several people at once. He stared at Mo Xiuyao and asked, "Will Mo Jingli really give it to you?" Losing the Chu capital was already humiliating enough. If he also lost the Dechu state's national treasure, Mo Jingli's face as the Prince Regent would really be trampled under everyone's feet. Mo Xiuyao smiled complacently, compared to a few inanimate objects that can't be eaten and can't be used. Isn't it more important to have a healthy son? Young Master Qingchen was silent for a while. As expected, Mo Jingli didn't want to be a righteous person. Give me the phoenix zither. Mo Xiuyao's smile became even more cheerful. Brother Su, this is the Dechu state's national treasure. Even if it's you, I can't just give it to you casually, right? Su Qingchen looked at him indifferently. Do you know how to play the zither? A little. Compared to young Master Qingchen, Prince Ding's zither skills could only be said to be a little. Besides, Prince Ding's interest wasn't in the zither. Naturally, he didn't care whether the zither in his hands was a newly crafted one or a famous one that had been handed down for generations. But it was different for young Master Qingchen. The white jade phoenix zither was probably more attractive to young Master Qingchen than a peerless beauty. Young Master Qingchen was smart. How could he not understand Emo Xiuyao's meaning? He snorted lightly and no longer mentioned the zither. Just because he couldn't get it didn't mean that others couldn't either. Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled at Su Qingchen. Although he couldn't guarantee that others couldn't get it, he could guarantee that young Master Qingchen wouldn't be able to touch it. Seeing the murderous look between the two, Yili helplessly interrupted, "Let's wait for Emo Jingli to deliver the item first. Big brother Xiuyao, shouldn't we talk about the people in Glass City first?" Su Qingchen also didn't want to continue arguing with Emo Xiuyao on this matter. Either way, everyone had to rely on their own abilities. He lowered his eyebrows and thought for a while before saying, "So, the northern tribes want to negotiate peace with us. It would be best if we could form an alliance to deal with Xiling and Yelu Hong together? Does Yelu Yi think that the people in the Prince Ding mansion are all idiots?" If it was in the past, Yelu Yi would have believed this suggestion. But after the Mahist army took over the Emperor of Xiling City, the area that was originally connected to the northern tribes now belonged to the Prince Ding mansion. This meant that the northern tribes and Xiling's plans wouldn't clash at all. As the saying goes, befriend the distant and attack the nearby. Yelu Ye's actions were meaningless and wouldn't benefit the northern tribes at all. Emo Xiuyao laughed. "Does he think that we're all idiots? I'm guessing that such an idiotic idea wasn't thought of by Yelu Yi himself. But this summer the northern tribes suffered from a drought and the area they took over in the north was full of war. There's less than a tenth of their food left. It's not hard to understand why Yelu Yi wants to make a deal with the Prince Ding mansion. If he could control the northern tribe's food, he would immediately have the upper hand in the battle with Yelu Hong. Unfortunately, the prince has already decided to help Yelu Hong." Su Qingchen smiled faintly. "How should we calculate it? Yelu Hong is also the son-in-law of the Central Plains. As long as Princess Ronghua is the crown princess, I don't mind helping him." Emo Xiuyao laughed. Chapter 776. Su Qingchen raised an eyebrow. "Is this your condition with Yelu Hong?" Emo Xiuyao shook his head. "It's good that everyone knows about this. It won't be pleasant to bring it up." Su Qingchen nodded. "What about the north? Does Queen Helan have confidence in defeating Ren Qining?" Yi Li smiled. "Based on the fact that Ren Qining still hasn't seen Queen Helan's true colors, I think it's worth a gamble. There was nothing to lose if they lost." Su Qingchen nodded, thinking, if that's the case, we have to guard against Yelu Yi and Ren Qining joining hands. The alliance between the two sides was only a temporary cooperation to take down Chu Jing. Once Chu Jing was taken down, it was only a matter of time before they turned hostile. But if the Mahist army chose to help Yelu Hong and Queen Helan, then the alliance between the two would be even more solid. Emo Xiuyao said indifferently, "It doesn't matter. In any case, I don't intend to let them go. The northern tribes' army that entered Dechu State and the Mahist army would have a life-and-death battle sooner or later. As for Ren Qining, who wanted to restore his country, he wouldn't let him go either." Su Qingchen nodded. "It's good that you know. I'll talk to second uncle about Yelu Hong. I'll have to trouble Li to deal with Queen Helan." Yi Li smiled. "It's my duty. There's no need to trouble big brother. What do you plan to do with Yi Yu from the Yi family?" Su Qingchen asked with a frown. Su Qingchen didn't have a good impression of the Yi family, especially this Yi Yu. Even if she was coerced, it didn't change the fact that she had murdered Yi Li. Even a scholarly family like the Su family was very clear about who was close and who was distant. In the eyes of the Su family, Yi Li was a million times more important than the unrelated Yi Yu. In the past he had thought that Yi Yu was dead. Now that she had appeared in Glass City perfectly fine and was unwilling to give up and continue to monopolize it, young Master Qingchen could no longer tolerate this. She was even a little displeased with Emo Xiuyao, who had handled this matter so neatly. Emo Xiuyao smiled leisurely. "Don't worry, someone will help us get rid of her." A sharp glint flashed through his smiling eyes. How could he let go of someone who had once wanted to hurt Ali? In the most remote room of the Yi residence, Yi sat on the edge of the bed, lost in thought. She knew that being discovered by the Prince Ding mansion meant that all her plans had come to an end. But she really couldn't accept it. After so many years, she had suffered so much to get to where she was today. In order to avoid being investigated by the Prince Ding mansion, She carefully endured and did not allow herself to reveal any traces of her past resemblance to Yiyu. It wasn't easy for her to endure until now. Yiyu felt a little regretful. If he hadn't tried to cheat, if he had directly gone to Jiangnan, perhaps he could arrive safely, and perhaps he wouldn't be discovered by the Empress Dowager's people. Unfortunately, it was too late for regrets now. Yiyu. A cold voice entered her ears. Yiyu was stunned. She turned around and saw Mo Jingli standing at the door. Prince Li, why are you here? Yi Wenhua had already ordered people to guard the door and courtyard. Other than her mother who brought her food, no one was allowed to enter. Mo Jingli stared at her coldly. I can come in if I want to. Yi was delighted. Are you here to take me away from here? Mo Jingli stared at her. Where is the medicine I want? Yiyu's expression changed slightly. She forced a smile and said, we agreed that after we arrived in Jiangnan, I would only give it to you after the matter was done. Mo Jingli flung her back onto the bed. You gave the medicine to Mo Shuyao, didn't you? Yiyu's expression changed when she heard this. Mo Jingli was furious. Bitch. He had only come with a glimmer of hope, but when he heard the truth he couldn't hold back his anger. Everything was ruined by this bitch. Because of her cleverness he had to pay 10 or even 100 times the price to get what was originally within his reach. Prince Li. Yu called out. Mo Jingli was indeed very irritable. Do you know what Mo Xiao asked me for? The 4 treasures of the nation. It's because of you. Yu was dizzy from Mo Jingli pulling on her clothes. The 4 treasures of the nation. She knew that they were the 4 most precious treasures in the Chu Palace. She had wanted to take a look at them when she was the most favored. She had only mentioned them once and Mo Jingqi had scolded her for half a month. It was said that even the most favored noble consort Lu didn't have the chance to see them. In the past few years the treasures represented not only the value of cities, but also the face and dignity of the Dechu state's imperial family. Yu knew that Mo Jingli hated her to the core right now. She quickly said, Prince Li, take me away from here. Even if you don't have them, I can help you deal with the Empress Dowager. Mo Jingli sneered, deal with the Empress Dowager? Do I need you to personally deal with I? Who do you think you are? I realized. The reason why I couldn't get anything from you before was because I was too gentle with you. I won't make that mistake again. Tell me everything you know honestly and I'll let you suffer less. Impossible. Yiyu gritted her teeth. This was her last and only bargaining chip. If she told him everything she would die. Mo Jingli revealed a cruel smile. Impossible? Gradually, do you think this person is still impossible? He waved his hand and 2 guards at the door walked in with a child less than 10 years old. My son. Yiyu turned pale with fright. She had hidden the child very well outside the city. Why? Mo Jingli smiled with satisfaction. Yiyu, you think too much of yourself. Do you really think that I will help you support this kid to succeed the throne? I hate that I can't kill every one of Mo Jingqi's sons that I see. I'll leave her to you. Get what I want no matter what. With that, Mo Jingli looked at Yiyu with disgust, then turned and left. In the remote courtyard, the miserable cries of a woman could be heard occasionally. In less than an hour the guards left inside walked out. In the room Yiyu knelt on the ground. Her body was already covered in wounds. She quietly hugged the dying child in her arms and couldn't help but burst into tears. At this moment she really regretted it. If she had stayed in the countryside of her hometown, it would have been better than being poor for the rest of her life. Second sister. At the door Ying stood gracefully in a light-colored dress. She looked at Yiyu with a smile in her eyes. Her gaze was tender and touching. Inga. Yiyu came back to her senses. She quickly rushed over and grabbed Ying's hand saying, help me get a doctor. My child is injured. Ying gently pulled her hand away. A cold smile appeared on her delicate face. Second sister, the prince ordered that no one is allowed to call a doctor. I can't make this decision. Inga. Seeing the expression on Yi Ying's face, Yiyu looked at her gentle and delicate sister in shock. Why? Why? Yi Ying sneered. Second sister, why didn't you think about why when you wanted to get close to the prince? What did you say? Anyway, the prince doesn't favor me. How can you help me when you're here? What do you want to help me with? Is snatching my husband helping me? I didn't. Yiyu said with difficulty. He had never thought of snatching Mo Jingli. That was just a temporary expedient. Why didn't her sister understand? Inger, I'm begging you. He's your nephew. Help me save him. Yi Ying's face showed a trace of resentment. Where did his father take my son? My son's whereabouts are unknown. He can go to hell too. After saying that, Yi Ying pushed Yi Yu away and turned to leave without mercy. Inga. Yi Yu wailed weakly. She could only watch as her sister walked further and further away. Chapter 777. Looking at Yi Ying leaving without mercy, Yi Yu wanted to chase after her, but she was in so much pain that she could not move. She could only hug the unconscious child and sob bitterly. If she had not wanted to rely on Mo Jingli to regain a more honorable status, she would not have ended up like this. However, no matter how much regret she had, she couldn't bring herself back to reality. Not long after, a courtyard in the most remote corner of the Yi residence was on fire. In the front yard, Yi Wenhua and Madame Yi were politely sending Mo Jingli out. Although Yi Wenhua was polite on the surface, he wished that Mo Jingli would never come again. Originally, she did not want to agree when Mo Jingli came back and asked to see Yi Yu. However, Madame Yi was not satisfied and agreed to let Prince Li see Yi Yu. At this moment, looking at Mo Jingli's gloomy face and Madame Ye's disappointed face, Yi Wenhua did not know what to say. Master, it's not good. The backyard is on fire. The servant behind him hurriedly caught up and shouted anxiously. Yi Wenhua was stunned and asked, "Where is the fire?" The servant said, It's the courtyard where Prince Li and Princess Consort went." This answer was very strange. If it was the courtyard where Second Miss was locked up, everyone would think that it was related to Mo Jingli. However, the answer was that Prince Li and Princess Consort Li went to the courtyard. Prince Li just came out and the courtyard was on fire. Even a fool would think that Prince Li had something to do with this. Everyone turned around and saw thick smoke billowing out from the backyard. Wang screamed, "Yuger!" Yi Wenhua said in a low voice, "Send someone to put out the fire." After that, he ignored Mo Jingli and bowed to Mo Jingli. Then he turned and left for the backyard. Wang Shi came back to her senses and followed Yi Wenhua to the backyard. Mo Jingli's eyes darkened as he stood at the entrance. He glanced at Yi Ying beside him and said in a deep voice, "Return to the post house." Yi Ying nodded obediently. "Yes, Prince." In the blink of an eye, the somewhat irritated door suddenly became silent. Old Madame Yi was still in a daze. How could this be? When the news of the fire in the Yi mansion reached the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Shuyao just smiled indifferently. "Are you sure this time? That woman won't come back to life again, right?" Ajin, who was standing at the door, nodded seriously and said, "Prince, don't worry. Ajin personally went to check. It's definitely Yi." Mo Shuyao smiled in satisfaction. "Very good. You've just returned and I'm already asking you to do this. Thank you for your hard work. Go back and see Uncle Mo." Ajin nodded and turned to leave without asking any more questions. Mo Shuyao's calm voice came from behind. "You don't have to tell the princess consort about this." Ajin paused and then continued to walk out. The prince probably felt that there was no need to tell the princess consort about this kind of small matter. The study was silent. Mo Shuyao looked at the letter on the table and showed a trace of a happy smile. At this time, Yi Li's courtyard was very lively. Not only were there second Madame Su, Qin Zheng and the others, there were also first Madame Su, Empress Hua, Murong Ting and the other womenfolk who were close to Yi Li. Mo Xiaobao, Leng Junhan, Su Jirui and the twins who just turned 1 month old were also there to join in the fun. There were only 2 days left until Mr. Qingyun's birthday. Li City had already prepared everything that needed to be prepared. For this matter, the Prince Ding mansion had been busy for many days. When it really came to this time, it was rare for them to have some free time. A group of womenfolk gathered at Yi Li's place to visit the 2 babies. The 2 Madame Su held 1 baby in each hand. Looking at the pink and tender babies, they couldn't bear to part with them. The Su family only had 1 child, Su Jirui. When the 2 madams saw the babies, they naturally liked them very much. Moreover, ever since the 2 little things opened their eyes, they were exceptionally obedient and smart. One was happy when he saw people. Although the other was more quiet, he was also very obedient. They were even easier to take care of than Mo Xiaobao when he was young. Even Mo Shuyao had to admit that these 2 little guys added together couldn't be compared to Mo Xiaobao when he was young. "Good boy. My Xiao Lin'er. He really looks." First Madame Su was especially fond of Xiao Lin'er. Once she held him, she refused to let go. Although he was still a small child, It was clear that Xiao Lin looked more like the Su family. First, Madame Su, who had never been able to hold a grandson, naturally liked this smiling little guy. Second, Madame Su also liked Xiao Exing. Although she had a grandson, she didn't have a granddaughter. Not to mention a granddaughter, the Su family didn't even have a daughter. Seeing this obedient and beautiful little girl, second Madame Su also fell in love with her. Yili looked at the obedient baby lying in the arms of the two Madame Su. She covered her mouth and smiled. Aunts, since you like children, why don't you urge third brother and fourth brother to get married sooner or later? As soon as she said this, Hua Tianxiang and Mo Wuyo, who were sitting next to her, immediately blushed. Mo Wuyo blushed and hid behind Empress Hua. Hua Tianxiang had nowhere to hide. She could only glare at Yili with a red face. Li, are you? Qin Jing covered her mouth and smiled. Li is right. Tianxiang, I'm waiting for you to enter the Su family to accompany me. Murong Ting hugged her baby son and smiled. Isn't that right? My Junhan is almost 5 years old. You're so shameless. Hua Tianxiang stomped her feet in embarrassment. Second Madame Su was very satisfied with Hua Tianxiang as her future daughter-in-law. Seeing her embarrassed, she quickly said, "That's enough. Why are you talking about this in front of their daughter? I've already discussed it with your uncle, grandfather and Madame Yang. The old duke died for the country, so there's no time to get married during the mourning period. We can only move the wedding to next year. When the time comes, Tianxiang and Wuyo will marry into the Su family. It'll be a good story." Wuyo was still young, but Hua Tianxiang wasn't young. Originally, it would be good if they could get married later during the mourning period. However, at that time Su Qingfeng would be fighting in the Chu capital. They had no choice but to wait until after the mourning period. Second Madame Su was originally worried that she couldn't find a suitable daughter-in-law. Now that the candidate had been decided, she wasn't so worried. What's more, after Master Qingyun's birthday banquet, they would start to prepare for the wedding. Slowly and leisurely until next year. Empress Hua looked lovingly at her red-faced niece and daughter. Being able to marry into a family like the Su family was definitely a rare good marriage for them. She could rest assured. Although the Hua family was quite famous and had a noble family background, everyone knew that after Duke Hua passed away, the Hua family could be considered to have declined. Even if their descendants lived up to expectations, they wouldn't be able to rise again in 10 or 20 years. The Su family didn't have many members. Family background wasn't important. Hua Tianxiang and Mo Wuyo naturally wouldn't suffer any grievances if they married into the Su family. Hua Tianxiang was fine. She and Su Qingfeng both liked each other. Could be said that they liked each other. However, between Mo Wuyo and Su Qingbai, it was more Madame Su who played a role. Moreover, Su Qingbai wasn't someone who would suppress his anger like Su Qingfeng. It was difficult to see through his feelings. Mo Wuyo wasn't very old. Even if she had some feelings for Su Qingbai, she was still muddle-headed when she was set to marry into the two families. It wasn't that she was unwilling. It was just that she was inevitably at a loss and at a loss. Chapter 778. Yili saw Mo Wuyo's expression but didn't say anything. Su Qingbai definitely had a good impression of Wuyo. Otherwise, with his gentle but opinionated personality, he wouldn't listen to eldest Madame Su's wishes. When Mo Wuyo mentioned Su Qingbai, he didn't seem to dislike him. They were both still young and had plenty of time to grind. Princess Consort, Duke Chongqing and Princess Zhen Ning request an audience. Qing Shuang came in to report while everyone was chatting. Everyone was stunned. Empress Hua and Mo Wuyo's expressions were even more complicated. The others only found it strange at most, but the two of them had a deeper relationship with Mo Xiaoyun and Princess Zhen Ning. Murong Ting asked curiously, "What are they doing at the Prince Ding mansion at this time?" Ever since they moved to Glass City, Mo Xiaoyun and Princess Zhen Ning had lived in seclusion. Other than visiting Yili when they first arrived, they had never set foot in the Prince Ding mansion. It was no wonder that Murong Ting was curious. Yili thought for a moment and said, "Let them in." Qing Shuang accepted the order and left. Eldest Madame Su asked, "Duke Chongqing and Princess Zhen Ning are looking for you. Shall we leave first?" Yili shook her head and said, "They will be living in Glass City for a long time in the future. Don't tell me we won't see each other anymore? They should be here for Noble Consort Lu." Noble Consort Lu. All the womenfolk were shocked. In their opinion, noble consort Lu was someone who had passed away a long time ago. Yili nodded and pondered for a moment before saying, "Noble consort Lu isn't dead. She's in Glass City right now. Duke Chongqing and Princess Jinning should have gotten the news and came to me for confirmation." Soon Mo Xiaoyun and Princess Jinning were brought in. Both of their complexions were quite good. It seemed that they were living quite comfortably in Glass City. However, looking at the hideous scar on Princess Jinning's half-drooping face, everyone couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. Greetings to Princess Ding. The two didn't have the arrogance of the princes and princesses of Dechu State. When they saw Yili, they greeted her respectfully. Yili smiled and said, "Prince Chongqing and Princess Jinning need not be so courteous. Come and have a seat. Have you gotten used to living in Glass City these days?" Mo Xiaoyun nodded calmly. "Thank you for your concern, Princess Consort. My sister and I are fine." Although these words were polite, they were also sincere. Although they were powerless princes and princesses in Glass City, after experiencing all kinds of hardships and pain in the past 2 years, this kind of life was not so difficult. Moreover, the Prince Ding mansion did not mistreat the siblings. Although Mo Xiaoyun was young, he could see it clearly. In this world, other than Glass City and the Prince Ding mansion, there was no place for the two of them. His age and ability were far from enough to establish a strength that could protect him against the various forces in the world. Yili nodded. She was very satisfied with Mo Xiaoyun's clear-headedness and understanding of the situation. The two of them thanked Yili and sat down on the empty stool at the side. Only then did they see the acquaintances sitting beside them. They couldn't help but be surprised. Imperial Mother. Imperial Sister. Although noble consort Lu and Empress Hua had always been at odds, Mo Xiaoyun and Princess Jinning did not have any ill feelings towards Empress Hua. At most, Princess Jinning was very jealous of Mo Wuyu. But that jealousy seemed even more meaningless now. Because of noble consort Lu, Mo Wuyu didn't like these two siblings. But he also knew that their days in Glass City in the past 2 years were not much better than his experience in the past. Looking at Princess Jinning's face and the way they acted when Chu Jing was besieged, in the end they were still biological siblings. Mo Wuyu couldn't help but feel a little soft-hearted. He nodded and said, "Are you all well?" Princess Jinning's eyes were slightly red. She bit her lip and nodded. She lowered her head in shame. When she knew that Mo Wuyu was sent to Nanzhao King, she had gloated in her heart. Now seeing that Mo Wuyu didn't show a look of disdain and ridicule because of her disfigured face, and didn't even show the pity she hated the most, she felt a little ashamed in her heart. "Imperial Sister," Mo Wuyu smiled and said, "Just call me Wuyu. I'm no longer a princess now." Mo Xiaoyun nodded in understanding. He said to Empress Hua and Mo Wuyu, "Mother, Sister Wuyu." Empress Zheng Hua felt a little strange for her mother, but it was not excessive. Empress Hua was originally Mo Jingqi's wife after all. All the princes and princesses had to call her Imperial Mother. She was the official mother of Mo Xiaoyun and the other princes and princesses. Empress Hua nodded slightly. She looked at Mo Xiaoyun and said lightly, "You have suffered in the past 2 years. Since you have endured it, forget the past. Live well with your sister." Mo Xiaoyun nodded and said, "Thank you for your guidance." Prince Chongqing and Princess Jinning came to the Prince Ding mansion. "What's the matter?" Yili asked. Mo Xiaoyun looked at the many womenfolk in front of him and didn't hide anything. He nodded and said, replying to Princess, "My sister and I heard people say that there is a woman beside the 7th prince of the northern tribes. The description is very similar to Imperial Mother. Is it true?" Yili looked at the two people staring at her and sighed softly. She nodded and said, "Yes, the woman beside Yelu Yi is called Qing Yi Na. It is said that she is the fiancée of the 7th prince. Although I haven't seen her real face, according to Princess Ronghua, she is exactly the same as noble consort Lu. If you have any doubts in your heart, you can go to the post house and ask her." Mo Xiaoyun's expression was slightly subservient. He said in a deep voice, "My sister and I went to the post house twice to ask for an audience, but we were rejected. So, we came to see Princess to ask Princess to check." Yili thought for a moment and said, "Qing Yi Na is someone brought by Prince Yelu. She is also a guest. It is not convenient for this consort to send people to check on her. However, you can go and ask Princess Ronghua. Princess Ronghua often went in and out of the palace when she was young. She should be more familiar with that person than this consort." In fact, listening to Yi Li's words, the two of them had basically confirmed noble consort Lu's identity. Not to mention Mo Xiaoyun's gloomy face. Princess Jin Ning's hand that was holding the handkerchief had turned white and was faintly trembling. Yi Li looked at the two of them and said earnestly, "No matter whether that person is noble consort Lu or not, you have to think thrice before you act. You must not act rashly. If you have any difficulties, come to the residence and talk to me and the prince. Although this is Glass City, Yelu Yi is the prince of the northern tribes after all. His power is not small. You must not act rashly." Mo Xiaoyun was silent for a moment and nodded. "Many thanks for Princess's reminder. We understand. We won't disturb Princess any longer. My sister and I will take our leave first." Yi Li nodded lightly and looked at Princess Jin Ning and said softly, "Don't stay in the room all day. Come out and walk more. It's not so bad outside." Princess Jin Ning bit her lip and nodded before hurriedly leaving with Mo Xiaoyun. Seeing the siblings leave, everyone's mood became somewhat gloomy. Hua Tianxiang frowned and said, "Princess Jin Ning's face was really damaged by noble consort Lu? She used to walk around the palace often, but she did not have much of an impression of Princess Jin Ning. In fact, noble consort Lu's 3 children were not very similar to her. Princess Jin Ning as a daughter was not valued by her own mother. Mo Jingqi also doted on Mo Wuyo, so she did not have much of a presence in the palace. She was completely not like the daughter of a concubine who was crowned the head of the harem. At this time, seeing the scary scars on that originally beautiful face, Hua Tianxiang could not help but sympathize with her. Chapter 779. Yi Li shook her head and said, "No one knows what happened. When we rescued her, noble consort Lu had already disappeared. She was the only one in the cold palace. If we hadn't rescued her in time, I'm afraid everyone would have thought that noble consort Lu was the one who died." In this way, no matter what the truth was in the eyes of the surviving Princess Jin Ning, it was her biological mother who threw her into the sea of fire to die. Empress Hua frowned slightly and said, "I think Jin Ning hates noble consort Lu to the core. Will something happen if they go to her? With Prince Chongqing there should be no problem." Yi Li frowned and said, "Speaking of noble consort Lu, everyone couldn't help feeling disgusted. They naturally knew about noble consort Lu's feelings towards Mo Xiuyao and how she forced Mo Xiuyao to marry her. Coupled with Princess Jin Ning's matter, their disgust towards noble consort Lu went up a level. Murong Ting hugged Leng Junhan and said hatefully, "If I meet that kind of woman, I'll whip her directly." Mo Xiaobao, who was sitting next to Yi Li and eating snacks obediently, blinked and asked, "Mother, are you talking about the white-clothed auntie in the Chu capital?" Hearing this, Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaobao with some surprise. "You still remember noble consort Lu?" Mo Xiaobao pouted unhappily. "That auntie was the most annoying. She always looked at me and mother with strange eyes. I wanted to tell father that if she looked again he would dig her eyes out. Who knew that she would die? So he's not dead yet?" Yi Li's head was throbbing with pain. How could he be so excited? When did she teach him such a cruel idea? At that time Mo Xiaobao was not even 7 years old. In the northern tribe post house, Princess Ronghua received the news that Prince Chongqing and Princess Jin Ning wanted to see her. A strange smile appeared on her lips. She ordered the attendants beside her to immediately invite the two in. Mo Xiaoyun and Princess Jin Ning had come twice before, but they were sent away by the post house's people. They couldn't even enter the door. This time he asked to see Princess Ronghua. Sure enough, he was soon taken in. Princess Ronghua specially received the two people in the main hall of the post house. When she saw Mo Xiaoyun and Princess Jin Ning, she was full of smiles and pulled them to sit down. "When I was still in the Chu capital you were still children. I didn't expect that after not seeing you for so many years, you've already grown up." Looking at the young man and girl in front of her, Princess Ronghua sighed. Although she wasn't old yet, seeing a child grow up into an adult made people sigh with emotion. "Is Aunt Ronghua doing well in the northern tribes?" Mo Xiaoyun asked. Princess Ronghua smiled and said, "The crown prince treats me very well. Everything is fine. I've heard about what happened in the past few years. It's just that the two of you have suffered." Mo Xiaoyun was no longer a child who didn't know anything. He smiled faintly and said, "Royal sister and I are also very good. The Prince Ding mansion is very good to us." "It's good. Prince Ding is a kind-hearted person. Although they were not as rich and honorable as the princes of the royal family, compared to those who schemed against each other, their days were much more comfortable. Now that you've finally come out, don't think about those things. Not everyone has the luck to jump out of this circle. Princess Ronghua felt that it was also a piece of advice to the two. Emo Xiaoyun nodded and said, I understand. Thank you for your advice, Aunt. Aunt Ronghua. Princess Zhenning looked at Princess Ronghua and hesitated. Princess Ronghua naturally understood why they came. She raised her hand and patted the back of her hand gently and said softly, I've heard about what happened to you. Good child, you've suffered. You want to see Qing Yaina, don't you? Emo Xiaoyun hesitated and nodded. They had heard before that Princess Ronghua was arrogant and domineering. At this time, seeing her so kind, they didn't like it for a while. After all, they were children born in the royal family. No one was pure and innocent. Naturally, they had some doubts about such a kind Princess Ronghua. Princess Ronghua saw through his doubts at a glance. She smiled and said, Silly child, who can be the same as when they were young? In fact, I'm not sure if she is. I'll ask someone to invite her over. You can meet her. Don't be impulsive. The two nodded silently. After a while, noble consort Lu, dressed in white, came in. Without looking at the hall, she said coldly to Princess Ronghua, What do you want to say? These 2 days, noble consort Lu was in a very bad mood. Not only because after meeting Mo Shuyao and Yi Li on the street 2 days ago, but also because she was severely reprimanded by Yelu Yi when she returned to the post house. It was also because Mo Xiaoyun and Zhen Ning came to see her yesterday. Before coming, she really didn't think that these 2 children would be in Glass City. More importantly, she didn't know how to face them and she didn't want to see them. Princess Ronghua raised her eyebrows and said, What do I want? Someone is looking for you. Who? Noble consort Lu's voice was hoarse. She looked at the 2 teenagers who were looking at her coldly in shock. In the blink of an eye, 2 years had passed. Mo Xiaoyun was much taller than 2 years ago and looked much calmer. Princess Zhen Ning sat next to Mo Xiaoyun. Her face was also covered with a veil, but her eyes were as cold as ice. Noble consort Lu's heart trembled. Who are you? After a while, noble consort Lu calmed down and said reluctantly. But how could her shocked eyes and familiar aura be hidden from her own children? Seeing that noble consort Lu didn't intend to recognize them, a trace of pain and resentment flashed in their eyes. Meeting Princess Zhen Ning's cold eyes, noble consort Lu immediately evaded with a guilty conscience. She turned around and stared at Princess Ronghua. Crown Princess, what do you mean? Princess Ronghua drank tea leisurely and said with a faint smile, What do you mean? They are the orphan of my cousin the Emperor. Prince Chongqing and Princess Zhen Ning are here for you. Qing Yaina, don't you know them? Of course I don't know them. Noble consort Lu said, Since there's nothing else, I'll go back to my room first. After that, she didn't even look at Mo Xiaoyun and Princess Zhen Ning and turned to walk inside. Princess Ronghua put down the teacup and said with a smile, Don't go, Qing Yaina. These 2 children have worked so hard to find their mother. Their filial piety is commendable. Even if you really don't know them, you should make it clear to them. Noble consort Lu was startled. She looked back at them hurriedly and said, You've got the wrong person. Mo Xiaoyun and Princess Zhen Ning were silent. Seeing noble consort Lu turn to leave, Princess Zhen Ning gritted her teeth and said, Mother, you really don't know us. Chapter 780. Noble consort Lu shuddered and snapped. What nonsense are you talking about? I don't know you. Hurry up and leave. Princess Zhen Ning closed her eyes and said in a low voice, Don't you feel guilty at all? I don't know what you're talking about. Noble consort Lu forced herself to be calm and waved to call the guards outside. Come, drive them out and don't let them in again. Princess Zhen Ning stood up abruptly but was stopped by Mo Xiaoyun. Mo Xiaoyun stopped Princess Zhen Ning, who was about to pounce on them, and said in a low voice, Sister, let's go back first. Princess Zhen Ning was dragged out by Mo Xiaoyun, but her eyes were fixed on noble consort Lu. She stared fiercely at her. When Mo Xiaoyun and Princess Zhen Ning disappeared at the door, noble consort Lu seemed to have disappeared and fell into the chair weakly. Princess Ronghua leisurely looked at her and smiled faintly. Why are you so heartless? Even if you have 2 children, the royal family of the northern tribes doesn't care. The northern tribes are not as well behaved as us. Besides, with your age, Do you want people to believe that you're a virgin? Ronghua. Noble consort Lu glared at her fiercely. Princess Ronghua stood up and smiled indifferently. Since Prince Chongqing and Princess Jinning mistook me for someone else, I'll take my leave. My future seventh sister-in-law. But, will my seventh brother really marry you? Noble consort Lu's expression became even more sinister when she heard Princess Ronghua leave the hall with laughter. Her hands hidden in her sleeves were clenched tightly and her long nails dug into her palms, but she didn't feel it. Why should she feel guilty? Everything she did was for the sake of living well, for the sake of revenge. Who knew how much she had suffered? Compared to the suffering she had before she met Yelu Yi, what were they? What was there to feel guilty about? Others only thought that Yelu Yi was infatuated with her beauty and was infatuated with her. But if Yelu Yi was really infatuated with her, why didn't he marry her for so long? But it didn't matter. As long as Yelu Yi still needed her, she could manipulate the northern tribes. She would definitely make Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li pay the price. In the blink of an eye, it was Mr. Qingyun's birthday. The entire glass city was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. It was even livelier than the New Year. In recent years, with the effective governance of the Prince Ding Mansion in the northwest, the influence of the Su family and Lishan Academy in the northwest had gradually increased. There were countless people in the northwest who had given Su Qingchen and the others favors. What's more, Mr. Qingyun was Princess Ding's grandfather. On his birthday, the people of Glass City naturally celebrated more than any other festival. In the past few years, as Glass City gradually expanded, Glass City imitated Nanzhao Royal City and built a large plaza not far from the Prince Ding Mansion. Behind the plaza was a tall and majestic observation deck. Every festival, the citizens of Glass City would gather here to celebrate. It was the first time that a banquet was held here, but because of this, the commoners were able to enjoy the banquet at a closer distance. Although this was a great test in terms of security, the shadow guards of the Prince Ding Mansion were not afraid of this. When the lanterns were lit, the entire square was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Countless beautiful fireworks bloomed in the sky. The people in the square cheered. The citizens of the city all walked out of their homes and gathered in the square to enjoy the rare and beautiful fireworks. On the observation deck, there were several banquets that could accommodate thousands of people. When this place was built, it was originally designed to hold large banquets. After all, the Prince Ding Mansion was not large and Glass City was not suitable to be a true capital city. If they built a temporary palace here, it would be a waste of money and manpower. Building this plaza and observation deck would not only allow the commoners to play here, but also allow them to gather during festivals. At the same time, it also solved the problem of the Prince Ding Mansion not being able to hold large banquets. After all, they couldn't hold banquets on the city gate tower every time, right? The two sides of the observation deck were concave forward, forming a semicircle. No matter which corner one sat in, one could see the whole picture of the entire square. It was like a three-level staircase, allowing all the guests to see the host at the top. This was originally something that Yi Li had mentioned, but in the end, it was Su Hongyan who completed it himself. In the past 2 years, many of the Prince Ding Mansion's banquets were held here. Could be considered as sharing the joy with the people. At the top of the building, there was a large golden longevity character on a red background. If one looked closely, they would find that this longevity character was made up of countless small longevity characters of different shapes. The characters were elegant and graceful, but it was young Master Qin Chen's handwriting. Tonight, the person sitting at the top was no longer Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li, but the white-haired young Master Qin Yun. Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao sat to his right. Below him sat Su Hongyu, Su Hongyan and the other young masters of the Su family. Below them were the influential guests from various countries and the civil and military officials of the Prince Ding Mansion. With such an arrangement, how could the people present not see the Su family's status in the Prince Ding Mansion? When the banquet started, Yi Li and Su Qinyan helped young Master Qin Yun to his seat. Then they walked to Emo Xiuyao's side and sat down. After all the guests were seated, there was an empty space in the plaza below. Hundreds of women in colorful clothes held colorful lanterns and danced to the melodious music. Such a grand scene was naturally much more magnificent than the banquets that people were used to in the palace. Many of the people gathered here to watch the fireworks also had a feast for their eyes. Emo Xiaobao sat between Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao. He also curiously looked at the grand scene in front of him. Although he was the young heir of the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li had never hidden him at home. He had seen all kinds of people. But it was the first time for such an unprecedented grand occasion. The nobles of the various countries below also noticed the black-clothed child in the middle of Prince Ding and Princess Ding. At such a young age he was already very handsome. A pair of big black eyes looked curiously at the people below. He did not feel the slightest fear. This child was the eldest son of the Prince Ding mansion who was named Yuqin by young Master Qin Yun. Not to mention that Prince Ding and Princess Ding just got a pair of twins. Just by looking at the child in front of them he was much more outstanding than everyone present. The Prince Ding mansion's heir could have such an imposing manner and composure at such a young age. The Prince Ding mansion should be proud to have a son like this. The guests on the observation deck weren't idle either, as there were singing and dancing below. While enjoying the rare magnificent song and dance, they chatted with the people sitting next to them. Then they all came forward to present young Master Qin Yun's birthday gifts. Perhaps they learned from Yelu Ye's lesson at Mo Xiaobao's 1-month birthday banquet. This time the gifts were quite well behaved. The gifts that the guests sent were all festive and appropriate birthday gifts. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li were very satisfied with this. After all, they prepared this banquet for young Master Qin Yun's birthday. Naturally, they did not want any accidents to happen and ruin the old man's trust. Even Mo Xiaobao personally presented 100 lifespan painting that he wrote. Although Mo Xiaobao was not yet 8 years old, under young Master Qin Yun's guidance, his studies were very good. His handwriting was also decent, making young Master Qin Yun very pleased. Chapter 781. Mr. Qin Yun was already old, and after receiving everyone's greetings, he only sat for a while before going back to rest. After Mr. Qin Yun left, Yi Li finally let out a sigh of relief. Although it was very grand to invite so many people to the birthday celebration, these people were not easy to get along with. If something were to happen in front of grandfather, it would make him unhappy for no reason. Thus, seeing that the banquet went smoothly before Mr. Qin Yun left, Yi Li's mood improved a lot. As for who would want to cause trouble in the future, the Prince Ding mansion was not afraid. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and saw the smile on Yi Li's lips. He raised his hand to hold her slender jade hand and laughed softly. No matter how much those people want to cause trouble, they still have the ability to see things clearly. They won't cause trouble at grandfather's birthday celebration. Yi Li smiled and nodded. I know, but I'm still a bit worried. Now that grandfather has gone back to rest, there won't be any problems. Knowing was one thing, but there would always be people who liked to cause trouble at this time. To Yi Li, nothing was more important than Mr. Qin Yun's mood today. After the birthday star left, the guests were much more at ease. When it came to Mr. Qin Yun, the #1 scholar in the world, even the nobles of the various countries couldn't help but feel a bit restrained. Not long later, the atmosphere in the observation tower became lively. Sitting below, Enchanting casually drank his wine while sizing up Yi Li, who was carefully wiping Mo Xiaoyao's mouth. Under the bright candlelight, the faint smile on the woman's lips seemed especially gentle and moving. Enchanting's sharp eyes slightly narrowed as his gaze swept over Mo Xiaoyao. I heard that Prince Ding and Princess Ding had twins a month ago. Such a happy occasion, I haven't congratulated you yet. Enchanting suddenly opened his mouth. His voice wasn't loud, but with his internal energy, it easily spread throughout the observation tower. The guests all came to their senses and hurriedly congratulated Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and raised his cup. I thank Shilling Genom of Gojoseon and thank you all. Enchanting smiled. Such a happy occasion, how can I not give a gift? I have prepared a big gift for Prince Ding. I hope Prince Ding will not reject it. At the same time, it shows the deep friendship between our two countries. Mo Xiaoyao's sword-like eyebrows slightly raised. He didn't believe that Enchanting would sincerely give him a gift for the twins, especially when he had just killed his grandson and granddaughter not long ago. Enchanting smiled. I sent people to search for this gift for a long time before I found it. It is absolutely precious. Mo Xiaoyao slightly curled his lips. If it is too precious, Genom of Gojoseon can keep it for himself. Enchanting smiled. Such a treasure, only Prince Ding can appreciate it. If it was me, it would be a waste. Not long after, a few West Hill guards came in carrying a tall box. They gently placed the wooden box on the ground and stood respectfully to one side, waiting for orders. Rather than calling it a box, it was more like an exquisitely carved wooden cabinet. Everyone's eyes involuntarily focused on the carved sandalwood cabinet in the hall. They didn't know what gift Genom of Gojosian had given Prince Ding that made him so cautious. Looking at everyone's reaction, Genom of Gojosian smiled with satisfaction. "Open it and take a look." A guard stepped forward and pulled the wooden cabinet from above. A faint fragrance immediately filled the viewing platform. Everyone couldn't help but exclaim. In the hall where the wooden cabinet was originally placed, there was a woman in white kneeling. This woman looked to be no more than 15 or 16 years old. Her appearance wasn't particularly beautiful either. At least there were at least 4 or 5 women present, including Princess Ding, who were more beautiful than her. However, she had a very strange attraction that attracted the gazes of all the guests present. He only felt that there was not a single part of this woman that was not perfect. It even made people feel that her not-so-beautiful appearance was flawless. If it was a more beautiful face, it would instead destroy this temperament. The woman was dressed in a plain white robe. Her hair was also casually draped over her shoulders. She didn't have any accessories on her body, and even her beautiful eyes didn't have any fluctuations. However, those who met her eyes couldn't help but hear their own thumping heartbeats. Genom of Gojosian, what is the meaning of this? Before Emo Xiuyao could speak, Su Hongyan's face had already darkened. Disregarding everything else, today was Master Qingyun's birthday, yet Lei Zhenting had sent a beautiful young girl as Prince Ding. It was truly somewhat rude. Lei Zhenting didn't mind. He smiled at Su Hongyan. "I know that today is Master Qingyun's birthday. This is indeed impolite. However, I just got this treasure and hurriedly had someone send it to Glass City. This is why I wanted to give it to Prince Ding as soon as possible. After all, such a treasure leaving it in Ai's hands is really unbearable." Lei Zhenting revealed a tacit understanding smile and nodded at Su Hongyan. Emo Xiuyao lowered his head to look at the white-robed woman. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Genom of Gojosian, what is the meaning of this?" Lei Zhenting smiled and said, "Prince Ding and Princess Consort have been married for almost 10 years. However, the residence has yet to take in a concubine. I know that Prince Ding has such a wonderful woman like Princess Consort as his companion. This world's common women won't be able to catch his eye. This is why I sent this woman. I think this woman is definitely a good match for Prince Ding." Many people didn't think much of Lei Zhenting's words. After all, Princess Ding could be said to be a peerless woman. Just based on appearance, she didn't lose to the white-robed woman. However, looking at the white-robed woman, they couldn't say anything bad about her. Thinking about it again, Princess Ding could be Prince Ding's wife at any time. However, if there were a few more beautiful concubines, it would also be a good story. Thinking like this, not only did they not have any thoughts about the white-robed woman, many people had other thoughts. Of course, this was excluding the messenger sent by the Emperor of Xiling. The messenger sent by the Emperor of Xiling only had his head lowered as he stared at the fine wine in the cup in front of him. It was as though the fine wine had suddenly become a nectar. In reality, it wasn't until Lei Zhenting mentioned this that the people seated noticed that in all these years, Prince Ding hadn't taken a concubine. The entire Prince Ding mansion only knew that Princess Ding was a woman. Even though Princess Ding was a peerless woman, but in the eyes of the nobles in this world where men were respected, Prince Ding's actions were absolutely inconceivable. Not to mention the nobles of other countries, even many of the subordinates of Prince Ding's residence had some thoughts of disapproval. It wasn't that they had any opinions about Yi Li. It was just that since ancient times, 3 wives and 4 concubines had been the norm. Moreover, Emo Xiuyao was the owner of the Prince Ding mansion. In the eyes of many, he was destined to ascend the throne in the future. He absolutely couldn't place his thoughts on a woman. Seeing that many people had expressions of approval and envy, Lei Zhenting smiled in satisfaction. He raised his head to look at Yi Li sitting next to Emo Xiuyao. Yi Li's expression was calm as usual. There was even a faint smile at the corners of her lips. On the other side, a trace of anger flashed through Su Qingyan's eyes. He was about to stand up. Su Qingbai, who was sitting next to him, held him down. Su Qingyan angrily said in a low voice, "Fourth brother, what are you doing?" Su Qingbai glanced at the indifferent Emo Xiuyao and said, "This is Prince Ding and Li Er's matter. The Su family wouldn't ask for Emo Xiuyao to only have Yili for the rest of his life. And if they weren't willing to insist on this matter, then no matter how many promises they made, it would just be nonsense. The Su family could only support Emo Xiuyao's decision and Yi Li's decision unconditionally, no matter what choice she made. Chapter 782. Definitely enough? Emo Xiuyao's cool voice rang out from the observation tower. The entire place was silent, and the outside was bustling with noise and excitement. I can't see how this woman can compare to Ai's princess. Lei Jinting smiled confidently and said, the princess consort is naturally a rare woman in this world, but the one in front of us isn't bad either. I can guarantee that her martial arts, talent, ability, and even medical skills and miscellaneous studies are among the best among the women in the world. If the prince doesn't believe me, why don't you ask the princess to come down and spar with her? Impudent! Emo Xiuyao shouted angrily. A white shadow flashed across the sky, and everyone couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Emo Xiuyao had already appeared in front of the white-clothed woman, and mercilessly raised his hand to strike the top of the woman's head. Just when everyone thought that the woman was going to die, the white-clothed woman suddenly raised her head and raised her hand, blocking Emo Xiuyao's attack. Emo Xiuyao snorted and once again clawed at the woman's shoulder. The white-clothed woman didn't meet force with force this time and instead retreated. Emo Xiuyao's claw missed and a hole was made in the wooden cabinet beside him. From this, it could be seen that if this claw had really grabbed the woman's left shoulder, it would have been crushed. Emo Xiuyao didn't pursue after his two moves had failed. He waved his sleeve and flew back to his original seat. However, a gust of wind shot out from his sleeve towards the white-clothed woman. Just now the woman had narrowly avoided the attack. She had just stood firm, but this time she couldn't avoid it. She could only raise her hand and take it head-on. Unexpectedly she only took a step back. Even her expression didn't change. She just stood silently beside Lei Jinting. Emo Xiuyao stood above, looking down at Lei Jinting and the white-clothed woman and calmly said, to be able to take 3 of Ai's moves and not lose, you do have some skill. In fact, this wasn't just some skill. Just now, Emo Xiuyao had used at least 80% of his strength, and the white-clothed woman was able to receive it without any change in expression. This proved that whether it was her moves, reaction or internal energy, they were all not bad. Even in the martial arts world she would definitely be ranked. Most importantly, she didn't look more than 16 years old. This level of skill was about the same as Emo Xiuyao's when he was the same age. Lei Jinting wasn't surprised and smiled. I said that I would definitely satisfy Prince Ding. Emo Xiuyao looked at him and revealed a mocking smile. Who said that I will accept her? Seeing that she has some real ability, this prince will not fuss over this offense. Scram back to where I came from. Once these words were said, the crowd couldn't help but go into an uproar. Even the white-clothed woman's expression changed slightly. For such a beauty to be rejected by Prince Ding without any hesitation in the eyes of the crowd, it was no different from a waste. After all, in this world no one was forced to choose between a beauty and Princess Ding. Wasn't it the dream of all men to have a beautiful wife and concubines? Lei Jinting slightly frowned and looked at Emo Xiuyao with some difficulty. Prince Ding is really going to reject her? Emo Xiuyao coldly smiled but didn't say anything. Lei Jinting seemed helpless and sighed. Does Prince Ding know where she came from? Emo Xiuyao said, I already said scram back to where you came from. She comes from Infinite Boundless Mountain. Lei Jinting's words were like a drop of water in a pot of oil, instantly causing the entire viewing tower to explode. Infinite Boundless Mountain was actually a place that the people of Dechu State were not unfamiliar with. It was the only main peak in the central and southern part of Dechu State, and was currently in the hands of Lei Jinting. However, the reason why everyone was familiar with it was not because of how beautiful its scenery was, or what miracles had appeared before. In truth, Infinite Boundless Mountain was hidden within countless mountains, and the surrounding peaks all looked the same. If one didn't have someone familiar to lead the way, it would be impossible to tell which one was Infinite Boundless Mountain, and it was very likely that one would get lost in the depths of the mountain. Legend had it that there was a hidden family in Infinite Boundless Mountain. The people of this family were proficient in astronomy, geography, medicine, divination, and astrology. The men were talented and the women were capable of assisting the king and supporting the country. Every 60 years, a descendant would descend the mountain to temper themselves. However, this family was dominated by Een, and in the past few hundred years, it was extremely rare for a man to appear. As for the women who descended the mountain to temper themselves, all of them were extraordinarily intelligent. The most famous amongst them were the empress of the previous dynasty, and the queen of Dechu State's second generation, as well as the queen of the Western Tomb from 60 years ago, Enchanting's late grandmother. It was said that the ancestor of the Su family had also married a woman from Infinite Boundless Mountain, although the Su family had never acknowledged it. However, it was precisely because in a short few hundred years, 3 empresses had appeared, and their appearance had brought about the prosperity of the dynasty. From then on, Infinite Boundless Mountain had a secret connection with the rise and fall of the dynasty. Now this white-clothed girl had chosen Prince Ding. Could it be that the gazes with which everyone looked at Emo Shuyao had become somewhat different? Enchanting smiled. Now Prince Ding should understand, right? It's not that I want to make things difficult for Prince Ding and Princess, and intentionally destroy the relationship between the two of you. It's just that everyone somewhat understood now. This matter was naturally not something that Enchanting could decide. If Enchanting could make the decision, even if he himself could not marry this white-clothed girl, he could still let his son do so. How could he let his enemy have it so easily? Everyone involuntarily looked at Prince Ding. Prince Ding, who had just solemnly vowed to scram back to where she came from, would he still be so resolute in the face of this white-clothed young lady with such a background? The viewing platform was silent for a long time. Just when many people thought that Prince Ding was about to agree, Emo Shuyao's cold voice resounded in the hall. Frem. Chapter 783. Emo Shuyao had never liked to shout loudly, but perhaps due to his personality, his voice always carried an extremely faint coldness. Therefore, when his face really darkened, even if it was just a casual sentence, one could feel the cold, killing intent contained within. The girl who had originally been standing by Enchanting's side suddenly raised her head, looking in shock at the man whose hair was as white as snow. Clearly, she had not expected that Emo Shuyao would actually reject her so mercilessly. It must be known that although Infinite Boundless Mountain's successor only entered the world once every 60 years, the significance of this, as well as the tangled and complicated relationship between Infinite Boundless Mountain and the various countries over the past few hundred years, caused everyone to treat this with caution. Originally, Enchanting's suggestion to present her as a present had already caused her to feel somewhat displeased. However, she also knew that Enchanting's words were not false. She had indeed come a step too late, as Prince Ding already had a Princess Ding by his side. Although she did not believe that Princess Ding was superior to her, the 10 years of relationship between Prince Ding and the princess were not fake. A man could have countless beauties, but only needed a virtuous wife. In a situation where he already had Yi Li, her advantage was not so obvious. However, even so, her willingness to be a secondary consort was already a huge concession in her eyes. She had not thought that Emo Shuyao would actually reject her. This was originally already a temptation that no man would be able to reject. However, thinking about it from another perspective, if he was unable to reject such a temptation, wouldn't Prince Ding be as unbearably vulgar as the majority of men in the world? Prince Ding, are you really going to reject me? The white-clothed girl stepped forward, asking. Emo Shuyao laughed coldly. I am not rejecting you. I want you to immediately scram. The white-clothed woman's face paled. No matter how calm and confident she was, it was unbearable for her to be humiliated in front of all the heroes of the world. The woman in white looked at Emo Shuyao, who was staring at her coldly, and then looked at Yi Li, who was sitting next to him. She asked, Princess Ding, what do you say? Yi Li looked up and asked in confusion, what does this imperial consort want to say? The woman in white stared at her and said in a low voice, I've heard that Princess Ding's talent and beauty are unparalleled, and that you are Prince Ding's virtuous wife. Presumably, Princess Consort also knows what to do. Prince Ding is the best. She definitely won't spoil Prince Ding's plans for unnecessary matters. Yi Li slightly frowned and asked in a soft voice, Miss, do you really want to know this consort's thoughts? The woman in white was slightly startled. She nodded and said, Of course. Yi Li indifferently said, From a woman's point of view, this consort only wants to tell you one word, scram. From a princess consort's point of view, This consort also wants to tell you to scram immediately. As a wife, she should naturally follow her husband's lead. Therefore, this consort still wants to tell you to scram back to where you came from. Well said. On the other side, Su Qingyan couldn't help but loudly praise. You. The woman in white's expression changed, but she didn't become angry. Instead, she quickly calmed down. She calmly looked at Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao and said, "It seems like today isn't the time to discuss matters. Why don't we wait for the two of you to think things through before we discuss?" After she finished speaking, she didn't care about the gazes of the people in the hall. She calmly turned and walked away, leaving behind a group of dumbfounded people. Yi Li's words clearly improved Emo Xiuyao's mood greatly. Pulling Yi Li back to her seat, he looked coldly at Lei Zhenting, saying, "Genom of Gojoseon, is this the gift you sent?" Lei Zhenting shrugged rather helplessly, saying, "I also had no choice. Anyway, the matter has already been settled. Prince Ding can just do as he sees fit." This time he had really wronged Lei Zhenting. First, let's not talk about whether or not this woman was of any use. Even Infinite Boundless Mountain's reputation and hidden power was enough to make people drool. Even if there was something wrong with Lei Zhenting's head, he wouldn't be willing to gift such a person to his greatest enemy. But who asked Infinite Boundless Mountain to be within his current jurisdiction, and who asked him not to offend people of Infinite Boundless Mountain? Of course, there was no lack of thoughts of wanting to see Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li fall out. Still, that was just in passing. Is Prince Ding really not interested in Infinite Boundless Mountain's descendant? Down below, Yi asked darkly. While the northern tribes belonged to the barbarian tribes beyond the Great Wall, they had also been influenced by the culture of the Central Plains in recent years. This was especially so for those of the royal family, who were naturally very familiar with the legends of the Central Plains. While they didn't completely believe in those legends of Infinite Boundless Mountain, there were times when these so-called legends were also a kind of symbol of the will of the heavens, and when used might not necessarily be any less effective than a million brave soldiers. Holding Yi Li's hand, Emo Xiuyao said mildly, "Whoever is interested, feel free to give it a try. I, however, do not have the fortune to enjoy it." Hearing his words, everyone felt both jealousy and admiration in their hearts. They were jealous of Emo Xiuyao's luck, actually being unable to catch the descendant of a legendary hidden family who had personally delivered herself to his doorstep. At the same time, they also admired him for remaining unmoved in the face of such temptation for the sake of Princess Yi. On the Su family's side, Su Qingbai's sword-like brows furrowed slightly as he looked at Su Qingchen in front of him, saying in a low voice, "Big brother, the people of Infinite Boundless Mountain have also come down to cause trouble. I'm afraid that there will be some trouble." Su Qingchen's smile was gentle and refined as he said mildly, "Fourth brother, do you still remember the last time something happened to someone of Infinite Boundless Mountain?" Su Qingbai furrowed his brows as he recalled, "The last one seemed to be Genom of Gojoseon's grandmother. It should be more than 60 years ago. Logically speaking, the people of Infinite Boundless Mountain should have appeared a few years ago, perhaps even 10 years ago." Su Qingchen raised his brows, saying, "The people of Infinite Boundless Mountain do indeed have some ability. Otherwise, they wouldn't have produced so many Empress mothers in succession. However, that's all. If they think too highly of themselves, my Su family is also not afraid of them." Between his brows, an air of transcendent arrogance naturally seeped out, as if he didn't place that so-called legendary family in his eyes at all. Hearing Big Brother's words, the expressions of the others also eased greatly. It was instead Su Qingyan who asked curiously, "Big brother, have any of our family's ancestors ever married a girl of Infinite Boundless Mountain?" Su Qingze swept him a cold glance. "There has never been anyone of unknown origins who entered the Su family. Go back and take a good look at the family records. The wives of the Su family didn't seek high positions, nor did they seek to be as beautiful as flowers or overflowing with talent. There was only one most important thing, which was to have a clean and upright family background. Those who liked to be secretive would never be able to enter the doors of the Su family no matter what. Meanwhile, the people of Infinite Boundless Mountain, in pursuit of that so-called mystery, just happened to like being secretive the most." Su Qingyan shrunk his neck back, hiding behind Su Qingbai, afraid of this cold-faced second brother as always. Up ahead, Su Hongyu and Su Hongyan, seeing their nephews calm and collected, also nodded their heads satisfactorily. The little interlude just now didn't affect the singing and dancing in the square below. The guests on the viewing tower very quickly began to drink and chat, but there were also many who were clearly a little distracted. Sitting beside Emo Xiaoyao, Yili frowned slightly as she looked at the guests below, just feeling that something was missing. Looking down at her frowning appearance, Emo Xiaoyao asked rather worriedly, "What's the matter, Lili? Did that woman make you unhappy?" Yili shook her head, smiling mockingly at him. "Prince's luck with women really isn't bad. Even this legendary fairy reclusive has come to throw herself into his arms?" Emo Xiaoyao lifted his arms and pulled Emo Xiaobao, who was sandwiched between them, into his embrace, casually cupping his two paws so that they wouldn't get in the way. Only then did he reach Yili's side, curling his lips disdainfully. "What kind of beauty is she? Infinite boundless mountain has fallen, hasn't it? It actually doesn't even have a decent woman." Chapter 784. Yili smiled and raised her eyebrows, not commenting on Emo Xiaoyao's evaluation. Although in terms of looks that white-clothed girl was slightly inferior to Yili, it was not by much. However, there was an extremely inexplicably attractive aura about her. Different from Yili's noble and graceful aura that made others submit to her, it was clearly easier for her to arouse some of the deepest desires in men. This was something that even Su Zuidi and noble consort Lu could not compare to when they were in their prime. Just looking at the expressions of all the guests in the Great Hall just now, it could be seen. Emo Xiaoyao knit his brows slightly. "That girl is a little strange. Don't get too close to her." Emo Xiaoyao had seen who knows how many supreme beauties. How could he not see that this white-clothed girl had a strange attraction to others? It was just a pity that this sort of attraction was virtually ineffective on an expert with a strong will like Emo Xiaoyao, and might even cause him to feel repulsed by it. Lili smiled and nodded. "I know. Why would the people of Infinite Boundless Mountain come down at this time? It has already been over 70 years since the last time, right?" Emo Xiaoyao laughed coldly. 10 years ago the world's situation was unclear, and they also did not have the ability to predict the future, so they naturally had to wait and see. Saying that it comes once every 60 years is just a smokescreen to deceive the world. How could those few times when things were really so accurate? When the Dechu state was founded, they just happened to appear when Taizong was vying for the throne. Why didn't they accompany Taizu in conquering the world? There's also Lei Jinting's grandmother. It was also a good time. Yili came to a realization. If the descendant of Infinite Boundless Mountain really came out once every 60 years so coincidentally, she really had to believe that the people of Infinite Boundless Mountain could predict the future, choosing a master on behalf of the heavens. At the end of the day, Infinite Boundless Mountain's reputation is still not bad. With the reputation of choosing a master on behalf of the heavens, the chosen one would be perfectly justified. It was no wonder that the expressions of everyone present were not right. This time Yili actually believed that this was not some scheme of Lei Jinting's. Emo Xiaoyao said disdainfully, "Choosing a master on behalf of the heavens? No one could stop I from doing what I wanted. Do we need Infinite Boundless Mountain to come and pick I?" Yili smiled. "This consort knows that our prince is ambitious. I will definitely not rely on nepotism to seize the world." Looking at her bright and smiling face, if they weren't in public, Emo Xiaoyao would have pounced on her and kissed her. "Boo-hoo." Emo Xiaoyao, who was unable to move, protested in dissatisfaction, but Emo Xiaoyao mercilessly stuffed a mouthful of food into his mouth. Unable to open his mouth to complain, Emo Xiaobao could only blink his large eyes at his mother in grievance. Unfortunately, in Yili's eyes he looked like a father feeding his son, although it wasn't very gentle. Yili had always felt that it wasn't good for the father and son to always be at each other's throats, so she didn't disturb their interaction. "Is there someone missing?" Yili stared down thoughtfully. She had felt that something was missing since just now. However, that white-clothed girl from Infinite Boundless Mountain had come out to cause trouble, causing her to not have the time to think about this. Emo Xiaoyao swept his gaze downwards. Actually, with so many guests, just the observation tower alone had over 1,000 people. It really wasn't easy to discover who was missing. Emo Xiaoyao frowned, pondering for a moment before saying, "Emo Xiaoyun and Jin Ning didn't come." Although these two didn't have any real power, their significance was still extremely great. After all, they were the rightful princes and princesses of the Dechu state, and had even taken the initiative to surrender the Chu capital to the Prince Ding mansion. No matter what, as long as these two didn't commit any heinous crimes, the Prince Ding mansion had to take good care of them. Looking at the 2 empty seats, Yi Li's mind flashed and she abruptly looked towards Yelu Ye's side, saying, "Noble consort Lu didn't come." Mo Xiuyao didn't think much of it, although she's claimed to be Yelu Ye's future princess consort. As long as there's no official wedding, she's not the princess consort of the northern tribes. Since she doesn't have any family background to show, it's normal for her not to come. Yi Li shook her head, saying, with her arrogance and self-confidence, she wouldn't think that she doesn't have the right to come. For someone like noble consort Lu, even if she was trampled into the mud, she would still think that she was the most noble and beautiful person in the world. Why would she think that she didn't have the right to attend the birthday banquet? Frowning slightly, she said, if that's not the case, where did she run off to? Could it be related to Prince Chongqing and Princess Zhenning? Mo Xiuyao said, even if that's the case, Miss Li doesn't need to worry about them. Mo Xiaoyun and Zhenning both have people protecting them. Even if something happens, it won't be them. Yi Li was helpless and could only suppress the worry in her heart, waiting for the banquet to end before making a fuss. By the time the banquet ended, it was already close to midnight. Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao naturally brought Mo Xiaobao back to the residence first, and there would naturally be people to take care of the rest. Unexpectedly, just as they returned to the residence, Zhuojing came to report, Princess consort, something happened to Princess Zhenning. Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao could only settle Mo Xiaobao down and follow him to Prince Chongqing's residence. When they arrived at Prince Chongqing's residence, they realized that Zhuojing wasn't exaggerating, something really did happen. Princess Zhenning sat in the main hall in a daze, and there was a pool of half-dried blood on the ground beside her. Princess Zhenning had always been brooding over her appearance, and would never forget to wear a veil in front of outsiders. But right now, her hair was disheveled, and the hideous scars on her face were undisguised in front of everyone. Not far away, there was a white-clothed woman lying on the ground, with a golden hairpin stuck in her abdomen, and her white clothes were already soaked with blood. Xin Yang and Mo Wuyo, who had come over at some point, were squatting on the ground to check. Yi Li looked at the woman's face and sure enough, it was noble consort Lu. She sighed softly and understood what had happened without asking. Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyun, who was standing at the side. Mo Xiaoyun's face was pale and his hands hanging by his side were tightly clenched. He said in a low voice, Princess consort, I was impulsive and injured the 7th imperial consort of the northern tribes. Princess consort, please punish me. Mo Xiaoyun had experienced many unforeseen events these years, and had long understood the fickleness of human nature. If noble consort Lu was really the 7th imperial consort of the northern tribes, Yelu Yi would definitely find trouble with the Prince Ding mansion after being injured by them. The best way for the Prince Ding mansion to settle the matter was naturally to hand her over, and at the same time get rid of him, the Prince of Dechu State. Could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Yi Li shook her head and pulled Mo Xiuyao to the side to sit down, asking, why is Mr. Xin here? How is her injury? Xin Yang rolled his eyes in annoyance and said, this old man was about to return after the banquet, but I was caught by this brat on the way back. Mo Wuyo raised his head and smiled at Yi Li, saying, Master and I passed by the entrance of the Prince Chongqing's mansion, and just happened to bump into Prince Chongqing. Princess consort, don't worry, Master's medical skills are superb, so there shouldn't be any problems. Xin Yang glared at Mo Wuyo and said, what do you mean there won't be any problems? In such a place, what's the use of this old man's medical skills? There was a difference between men and women, and Xin Yang couldn't treat an injury in a place like the abdomen. Although a doctor had the heart of a parent, noble consort Lu's identity was really not easy to deal with. Mo Wuyo wasn't afraid of being glared at by him and said with a smile, then Master can guide this disciple and this disciple will treat it, okay? Chapter 785. Xin Yang reluctantly glanced at the unconscious noble consort Lu, then muttered a few words of advice to Mo Wuyo. After that he let Mo Wuyo do the work, then walked to the side and sat down to rest. It seems that Wuyo has learned well from Mr. Xin, Yi Li said with a smile. Just by looking at Xin Yang's attitude towards Mo Wuyo, she knew that he was very satisfied with this disciple. Xin Yang said lightly, she's indeed more talented than the princess. In fact, Yi Li's talent wasn't bad either. It was just that her medical skills required calmness and patience. As Princess Ding Yili was always busy with worldly affairs. How could she have so much time to concentrate on her studies, let alone inherit her teacher's legacy? At that time Xinyang and Dr. Lin did feel that it was a pity. Emo Xiaoyun stood on the side and listened to their conversation. He vaguely understood that noble consort Lu probably wouldn't die for the time being. For a moment he didn't know whether to rejoice or regret. Glancing at his sister who was sitting next to him in a daze, Emo Xiaoyun cautiously said, "Uncle Prince Ding the princess. Tonight's matter." Emo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows. "You still want to say that you hurt her?" Emo Xiaoyun froze and nodded. "I was angry." "Xiaoyun will listen to Uncle Prince Ding's punishment." Emo Xiaoyao looked at him with interest for a while before saying, "I didn't expect Emo Jingqi to have such a son. It's not bad. But why did you take Princess Zhen Ning's golden hairpin to kill that woman?" "I was younger brother." Princess Zhen Ning, who had been in a daze, suddenly raised her head and stopped Emo Xiaoyun. She looked straight at Emo Xiaoyao and said lightly, "Uncle Prince Ding, I did it. You don't have to save her. If she dies, I'll pay with my life for her." Royal sister. Emo Xiaoyun was flustered and exasperated. He didn't care about noble consort Lu anymore. However, this royal sister who was only 2 or 3 years older than him had taken care of him since he was a child. Even though she wasn't smart or capable, she still tried her best to take care of her 2 younger brothers when they were neglected by their mother. Emo Xiaoyao frowned in displeasure. "Enough, she is not the princess consort of the northern tribes. Even if she dies, Yelu Yi will not seek revenge." "Zhening, do you really want her to die?" Princess Zhen Ning's face was pale. She glared fiercely at the woman in white on the ground. Her lips trembled, but she couldn't say anything for a long time. Emo Xiaoyao said casually, "If you really want her to die, then go over and press that hairpin down further." Hearing his words, not only did Princess Zhen Ning tremble in fright, even noble consort Lu, who was lying unconscious on the ground, suddenly widened her eyes. She looked at Emo Xiaoyao in disbelief. Noble consort Lu couldn't hold on because of the blood loss, but she wasn't in a deep coma. She could hear some of the words of the people around her. When she suddenly heard Emo Xiaoyao's heartless words, it was no wonder she woke up from her coma. Emo Xiaoyao, who was thinking of a way to pull out the hairpin, looked helplessly at Emo Xiaoyao. "Uncle Prince Ding, if you continue to provoke her, she really won't be able to hold on." Princess Zhen Ning definitely didn't hold back with this hairpin. If it pushed even a little deeper, noble consort Lu would be dead for sure. So they didn't dare to move her and could only deal with her on the spot. Emo Xiaoyao said seriously, "I's not joking." Emo Wuyo silently said, "I believe you're not joking, but can you not be so serious right now? Is it really okay to instigate a daughter to kill her own mother?" "That's enough." Yili glanced at Emo Xiaoyao, telling him to shut up. She turned her head and asked, "Wuyo, is it very difficult?" Emo Wuyo hesitated, then said, "It's not difficult. However, if you have something to say, just say it." Emo Xiaoyao said unhappily. He was very unhappy that he couldn't go back to hug his precious daughter and then hug Lili to sleep in the middle of the night. If it wasn't for the fact that Emo Xiaoyun and Zhen Ning were still useful, he would have just found a place to throw this woman away. In Glass City, Yelu Yi probably didn't have the ability to find her. Emo Wuyo looked at Princess Zhen Ning and Emo Xiaoyun, then said with a frown, "This injury isn't in the right place. Also, this woman seems to have miscarried half a year ago. If she's not careful, she probably won't be able to have children in the future." Since she was the future royal consort of the northern tribes, whether she could have children or not was probably a very important matter. Xin Yang raised his brows, then looked at Emo Wuyo and said, "Disciple, your medical skills still need to be trained. Please advise me, master." Hearing his master's words, Emo Wuyo thought he had diagnosed wrongly, and a trace of annoyance flashed across his small face. Xin Yang said, "How is this woman miscarrying half a year ago? She has miscarried at least 3 times in the past 2 years. Don't worry about it. You don't have to care about something that is destined to never exist again. Even if she didn't have this injury, she would still be like this." Looking at noble consort Lu, Xin Yang's expression was full of disgust. He naturally knew noble consort Lu's identity, but this wasn't enough for Xin Yang to dislike her. However, personally killing her own unborn child was not within Xin Yang's tolerance range. Xin Yang's medical skills could be said to be unparalleled in the current era. He could even calculate what kind of abortion medicine noble consort Lu had taken. Only a pregnant woman would take an abortion medicine that wouldn't harm her body, and even had some special effects. Mr. Shin, you mean she? Emo Xiaoyun stared at the woman on the ground, unable to ask. She used the dispersing fragrance pill and more than once. Emo Xiaoyun's expression suddenly became complicated. Princess Jinning was a girl, so she didn't know what it was. However, Emo Xiaoyun had been taught by the Lu family since childhood, so Prime Minister Lu didn't hide many private matters from him. Rather than calling the dispersing fragrance pill an abortion medicine, it was better to call it a kind of beauty-preserving holy product. However, it was unknown who discovered that this thing had even more miraculous effects when used during pregnancy. Once a woman was pregnant, her appearance would definitely not be as good as before. Such a miraculous medicine naturally attracted people like a flock of ducks. However, someone soon discovered that women who took this medicine during pregnancy would all have miscarriages without exception, and those who used it less would also give birth to stillbirths. However, the beauty-preserving effect was 10 times better than usual. There were even many women who didn't care about their unborn children for the sake of beauty. This medicine gradually became a forbidden medicine. A woman who lost her father had 3 miscarriages in 2 years, and all of them were caused by herself. Emo Xiaoyun really didn't understand what his mother, who used to be high and mighty, was doing. However, looking at that delicate and beautiful face, Emo Xiaoyun suddenly rushed out of the door and vomited. Although Princess Jinning didn't know the inside story, the fact that noble consort Lu had an abortion during pregnancy was enough to shock her. She walked to noble consort Lu's side in a daze and looked down at the beautiful woman on the ground. Princess Jinning only felt the resentment in her heart surging out like a burst dam. Bitch. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.